Hey now, Adam. How's it going? Today's Monday. How's everyone doing? The day after Father's Day. And you know how we should celebrate this? By talking about adult entertainment on the internet.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's cool. Racy. I like it.
So we watched last week, we didn't finish it. Maybe we'll finish it today. We watched a very interesting conversation. It was a backstage conversation of the Daily Wire where
Hmm.
they were talking about, is freedom important?
Right. Yeah.
Now,
Americans
I'm,
talking about this? Look, I'm a little pissed off already. I got to
I
tell
know.
you.
I know. Now, we are pretty hard on most of the people in that conversation, including Ben Shapiro. And I found this clip. This is an old clip. This is from 4 years ago. And it's Ben made a video specifically about should we ban pornography. And I listened to this and I thought maybe I misunderstood what Ben was saying in the freedom conversation. Maybe I was too hard on him. So I want to play this clip to see, like, okay, maybe I just didn't understand his position. But then I get confused because a few days after this airs, he then has a debate with Matt Walsh where it's like, seems like he's sort of, I can't tell if he's changing his opinion or if it's just the same opinion. He's hedging it because he's like, doesn't want to piss off the social conservatives in his audience or something. And then years later, he has that conversation with Destiny where he says he would be in favor of banning pornography if it was possible. So I don't know what the fuck his position is on this topic at all. So maybe you or the chat can sort of help me out here.
Right. I'll just add that. So we covered that live stream or the video for the backstage of the Daily Wire people. And I read all of our comments, so I see your guys' feedback. A lot of people constantly say, you need to add conservatives to the show. You need to invite a conservative on because you guys just don't get it. You guys are completely misunderstanding, misrepresenting all of this stuff. So,
Mm-hmm.
look, if any of you guys want to come on and argue the position, I mean, a lot of times we have done this. It's not something we haven't done on the show, but people, they imagine this position being more detailed, or Ben Shapiro or Matt Walsh are able to articulate the position more clearly than they are because they come on and it's kind of just, I don't think we're any closer to understanding what your perspective is. I don't think you're any closer to understanding how we're our position, or
Mm-hmm.
articulating how we're misrepresenting the position of Ben Shapiro and Daily Wire and company. But
Right.
if you want to come on, we'll do it again.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, if anyone wants to come on to talk about that, just send a message to Adam.
Yeah, let's do it. So this video I'm gonna watch, and I'm gonna understand Ben Shapiro's position on whether pornography should be banned or not. Right? That's where we're at.
Maybe
Okay.
we'll
I mean,
say.
this is a clearly articulated position. So when people comment and say, "Look, you don't understand Ben Shapiro's position," it's crystal clear. He's in favor of the freedom to watch pornography. I can say, "That's right. I saw that in the clip too." What I
Hmm.
mean, right? His position's going to be
Well,
clear.
this is from 2019, so I don't know. Maybe he's changed his position about it or something.
Okay.
But let's see. Let's watch. We're not gonna watch the whole thing. Obviously, it's 57 minutes, but we'll watch a bit of it.
Of government ought to be generally. And it's turned into this broader debate, conservatives versus libertarians, in which conservatives basically argue now, many conservatives are arguing, that the government ought to be engaged in promoting what they call the common good. And libertarians are arguing the government needs to completely stay out of this particular business. Now, I've been saying for pretty much my entire career that when it comes to
So okay, wait. Before we even get into anything beyond that, if there are conservatives who are saying we're not getting it, that like is Ben Shapiro correctly addressing the argument? Because that's the way I understand the argument, and I feel like when I say that, some people that identify as conservatives get really triggered.
The argument that the question is whether or not the government should be involved in making policy around
The
things like
common good.
pornography.
So here, let me play back for a second. This is he's laying out the difference between the libertarian position and the conservative position.
into this broader debate, conservatives versus libertarians, in which conservatives basically argue now, many conservatives are arguing, that the government ought to be engaged in promoting what they call the common good. And libertarians are arguing the government needs to completely stay out of this particular business. Now, I've been saying
So conservatives want to shape legislation around trying to promote a moral good, and libertarians are like, no, we don't trust the government to engage in that behavior.
Well, first of all, the government, whatever the government does, is perceived as in the common good. Otherwise, it wouldn't do it, right?
What do you mean?
What does the government do that isn't designed to isn't promoted as benefiting the common good, right? Obviously, the whole argument over immigration, over abortion, over like whatever position you're on, you're pro-choice, you're pro-life, you're going to argue it's for the common good. Pro-choice is for the common good. Pro-life is for the common good, right? Immigration, lots of immigration is for the common good. It benefits us economically. Immigration is bad. It's stopping immigration is for the common good. It hurts local workers. It hurts American workers, right?
So, but yeah,
Like,
but so wasn't right. So I understand exactly what you're saying, but doesn't that make Ben's position like nonsensical then? Because you're saying
it kind
everything
of
is
does. Yeah,
okay.
exactly. So yeah, when the libertarians say get out of government, what are they're saying? There should be no common good. The
Well,
free market should determine what is good.
I think well, it's interesting. Okay, because we're gonna watch him kind of debate Matt Walsh on this afterwards, and maybe he sort of talks about how it's more about like protecting like certain rights that the libertarian position is protecting certain rights. Because I agree, like technically everything is for what we consider good. But then the difficulty comes in when there's like a massive disagreement about what is the quote common good, and should there only be like a baseline of quote common good that's founded in like negative rights or liberalism or something that the government's engaged in protecting, and then everything else is sort of like decided in the more cultural social space.
But Sitch, this is the idea behind democracy. Who wins in democracy? The majority, right?
Mhm.
The bigger majority. So if you're talking about something like the common good, doesn't it make sense that the policy serves the larger majority, more people than not serves?
Hold on one second.
Uh-oh. Sitch needs to check the
Sorry
post
about that.
office. Oh, that's
I'm
okay.
back.
So do you understand what I'm saying? Like 51% is a larger common good than 48%, right?
Yeah, but that's part of why, I don't know. Do you see that there's that really weird, like goofy clip from CNN? I think it was today or yesterday, where they had some guy like, I walked around a Trump rally and I asked people if they thought Donald Trump was a threat to democracy. And I was surprised that many of them replied that we don't actually live in a democracy. We live in a republic. And it
Yeah,
was so
that is
like,
a fucking stupid Republican talking point that I can't stand.
no, first of all, I agree with you. It is a stupid Republican talking point. But then it's hilarious because it's like, then CNN tried to twist it around into like, well, they're saying it's a republic because they don't like they want to infringe on like the country's like people's rights, and they want to have like a dictator. It was like we have a dumb Republican talking point, and then we have a dumb CNN talking point trying to make it even dumber than it was, like trying to make it like insidious or something.
If
And
if
it's
if we live in a republic, why the fuck did you guys do January 6th? What was the thinking there?
well, it's a
fucking stupid.
constitutional republic, I think definitionally, but a constitutional republic is a form of democracy, so it's a stupid like contention because people try to make a contention between like, well,
You went
democracy
there
means
because the
it's.
election was stolen. That's the whole point of January 6th.
I understand, but I just want to be clear. So the argument, which is a stupid argument, is supposed to be like, well, democracy just means that you just vote on everything and the majority just wins. And a constitutional republic means like, oh, you have like elected representatives and there's protections and in the Constitution, blah 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 blah.
So
And
you
it's like,
vote on
okay,
the representatives.
I know. I agree with you. It's a stupid distinction. I have literally no fucking clue why anyone on the right wastes their time with this fucking argument. It's super weird. And then CNN made it even weirder by trying to make it like some kind of like anti-American thing. Anyway, the only reason I brought it up was because like what you were saying about like the majority, like, choosing the common good. It's like, yeah, the majority does choose the common good up into a point, and this is part of the benefit of America, is that we say, okay, even because we have this Bill of Rights, and because we have protections for certain individual rights, the majority can't just override those individual rights and then like enslave you or screw you over.
Yeah, the common good has limitations, especially where it infringes on the individual's rights. Hence the Bill of Rights.
Right.
The
So
first
the
10 amendments to the
libertarian,
Constitution.
right. So I guess the libertarian argument would be that the government should not be engaged in moral policing beyond protecting the individual rights of people that is laid out in the Constitution.
I mean, society exists
Mm-hmm.
because of the protections of the government. I know it drives fucking libertarians insane, but that's just the truth. Sorry, guys.
Okay, interesting. Okay,
Look,
well,
we have an entire monetary system. We have the protection of property rights. All this comes from government. Like just they have a monomaniacal hatred of government in the same way that socialists have a monomaniacal hatred of capitalism.
mhm.
It's silly. Okay. There can be excesses of government. There can be excesses of capitalism. There can be excesses of firearms. Okay. Like firearms are fine in the hands of law enforcement, right? They're not so great in the hands of fucking criminals.
Mhm.
Like it's just this idea that this one thing is a categorical bad is just, it's faulty thinking. It's completely faulty thinking. Right?
Sure. Or
Tools
can
are
be.
neutral. Yes. They can be
And
used for good or ill. Anyway, go
pretty
ahead.
much my entire career, then when it comes to matters governmental, I tend toward libertarianism. And when it comes to matters cultural, I'm very conservative because I believe that the founders predicated the notion of a small government, of a government that is there to protect your rights, on the idea of a moral and religious people, right? This is John Adams' famous line that this government was only constructed for a moral and religious people. Otherwise, the dark side of human nature would tear through the bonds of the Constitution like a whale through the cords of a net. Right, so that the entire presupposition of the founders is that you would have a moral and religious people. And if you read Alexis de Tocqueville in Democracy in America, he talks about how that social framework already existed. That social framework long preceded the founding of the United States, how Americans were apt to join associations, how Americans were apt to be member of churches, how Americans were broadly religious and personally liberal in terms of how they approached economics and regulations on other people. Because when you have a baseline level of social fabric and trust in people, then you don't feel the need to regulate them as much, right? So you need one to support the other, in other words. You do need a moral and religious fabric in the United States in order to support a small government. Well, one of the...
I don't know that I necessarily agree with this. It's like we have laws against murder because people want to murder one another, right? As soon as people don't want to murder one another, we don't need those laws. Like there's no point in making a law if there's something that nobody really wants to do.
Hmm.
So, but he's saying, look, he's saying there are these in the founding of the nation, we didn't have to have a lot of laws because there were these churches and other institutions that persuaded people not to want to do certain things that Ben Shapiro finds distasteful, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but as soon as those institutions started losing power and people were decided, look, I want to watch pornography. Okay. I like it. And Ben Shapiro's like, okay, well now people are doing things that are outside of the purview of government. So there's two choices. You can like make it illegal with the government or you can put up with it. And I think Ben Shapiro's problem is he's like, well, I kind of don't want that stuff to happen.
The things that has happened over the past 50 years is
I was just say,
complete...
I mean, first of all, I've heard a lot of people make this argument on the more further right end of the spectrum that like you can only have liberalism, you can only have libertarianism, you can only have freedom if there's a strong moral philosophy that kind of underpins society. And they kind of make the argument that America has lost that, right? So therefore, it seems to be making an argument that therefore we should lose some levels of our freedom. Now, I don't know if I'm assuming Ben's not making that argument here. At least he doesn't explicitly make that argument. But I'm not exactly sure why he's bringing it up in this context, because that's generally the framework when I hear other people make this argument to us when we've had conversations with people on that kind of space. But I'm skeptical that like the reason, or if it's even true, that like crime rates were lower back in the day, and thus government, they required less government regulation or less government laws, when it's more like, well, like living in society and businesses were just, everything was structured in a far simpler way. So obviously you didn't need as many laws or as many regulations because everything was just on a far more like simplistic level when we were when we were a base, farming society, right? As opposed to the bizarre technological powerhouse that we are now, where everything's hyper complicated and confusing. And also you have the situation where people lived in far more, rural communities with smaller populations where everyone knew each other, which obviously has a which probably, in my opinion, has the largest effect at reducing crime. Then, now as you live in larger and larger cities and societies where you don't know people, that has a massive effect on increasing crime because you just don't feel like you give a shit if you're engaged in crime against a stranger versus someone that you know.
Yeah, there is that argument that security costs go up as trust levels decline. And if you have a population that is religious, obviously trust levels climb. So you have lower security costs. And obviously those costs are borne by the state, right?
Mm-hmm.
Taxes have to be higher if you have to hire more police, right? If you need 5 cops to do the one job and 50 cops to do another job, obviously the 50 cops are going to be more expensive. So, and that has to do with how much trust is being fostered in the society. So that I can see some validity to the point there where government becomes unaffordable. But the argument that a lot of libertarians are making, they're making like a philosophical argument, not a it costs too much argument. It's like they just are against like the government having too much power. So,
well, and another part of the problem too with the argument, because I was trying to look it up, obviously the crime statistics were not very well kept, like in the 17 and 1800s in
I can
America.
imagine, yeah.
But there is a claim here, and I don't know if it's true or not, that says that that the homicide rate in the 1700s in America was significantly higher than it is now. And then it dropped in the 1800s, but it was still significantly higher than it is now. And it's only been, it's lower now than it was in the 17 and 1800s. So they're making the argument that crime, at least murder, was significantly higher back in those days, which would kind of undercut which would kind of undercut the idea that we've sort of become a less moral society.
Oh yeah. Sometimes it's moral to just off somebody though, Sitch. Who knows? Maybe you caught someone screwing your sheep. I mean, you should take care of business on that guy, right?
Well, it's interesting because I would think that a lot of it's I think a lot of crime, it has to do with whether people are presented with opportunities to do crime or not. It'd be like one of the biggest factors here. So,
yeah, that's why it's good to have some cops on the beat.
Complete fraying of that social fabric. The morality and the religiousness of the American people, obviously when it comes to matters sexual, but also in matters like drug use and matters like family formation, right? All of these things have declined pretty markedly. And so this has led to a really fascinating debate among conservatives. What's the first step here? Do you restore the culture, or do you simply do what the left would do and try and grab the commanding heights of government and then cram down from above? And I am firmly on the side of you have to grab the culture first. That if you want to work on the culture, you require the government to remain small, because the fact is that you are not operating in a vacuum. You are not operating in a world where you can simply grab the auspices of government and teach the people the right thing to do. Nor, by the way, do I think that it is moral to use the force of government to teach people the right thing to do. Because I think that completely overrules the idea of a representative government. Right? If the people don't believe a thing, and you're going to use the government in order to cram down the thing, that is inherently immoral, whether you're doing that on the left or whether you're doing that on the right. Now, even if the government is doing something I think is moral and they are cramming it down on the people, that is not what the government is designed to do. Because then the government is basically dictating to the people what a cadre of people at the top think is right. Now, I may believe that there is an objective moral good. I do believe that. But I also don't believe that I get to be the dictator over people. I think that completely defeats the notion of representative government. You may as well go back to the philosopher kings of Aristotle and Plato, really Plato. So I agree with
literally every single thing Ben Shapiro said here. Um, and this clip is why I wanted to play this because I don't want to misrepresent anyone because this is not the interpretation I got from what he was saying in the freedom conversation that we were watching last week. I was kind of getting the opposite vibe. And here he's very clearly saying, we can't just have the government do a top-down moral legislation about what is morally good. And he's kind of bringing this forward the argument. He kind of brings forward, I think, continuing going forward that it's just you wouldn't like we shouldn't even from like a pragmatic level. So I don't know if he's coming in from it purely pragmatically or also if he believes in it ideologically, but from a pragmatic level, you would just not trust the government to do such a thing, to implement such a moral restrictions on society in that fashion.
I mean, obviously, this is butting up against my conceptualization of morality in and of itself, because like thou shalt not kill is like it's a moral prescription. We literally have laws, and we literally from top down say you can't kill your ex-wife.
Yeah, but okay, let's for the sake, we have to, in order to have this conversation, we have to allow a level of charity and unspecificity. And to understand that when Ben Shapiro in this context is talking about having the government not legislate morality, he's not talking about like, is murder like right or wrong? He's talking about moral questions that there is not a strict line of agreement on that are the hot button topics in our society.
Right. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Like abortion or immigration or.
Well, I guess the question, I think it's more abortion, people argue because they're saying is death, right? It's a, you're killing something question.
So
right. So they would say that applies to that. Immigration, that's an interesting question. I don't know if people don't generally think of immigration, I think, in like that kind of moral question.
Okay.
But it sounds like you're just saying that you think Ben's entire position is like just nonsensical.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay. I don't agree.
I don't, how does he define morality? If he's defining morality as like the things that are wrong but legal, he's like anything in the realm of things that he thinks are wrong but legal, those are moral questions. And like murder and abortion, like those aren't moral questions. I'd be like, oh, okay, that's an interesting perspective, but I got it.
Mm-hmm.
Where exactly is the limiting principle when it comes to the involvement of government in promoting quote unquote justice and the common good? And you're seeing a lot of folks, people who write for me, right? People who write over here at Daily Wire. And this is why I think it's an interesting and fast.
The common good is a tell here, because I do think he's talking about like collectively good for society. So any sort of prescription that everyone would opt into because it's good for society, or it's not necessarily good for the individual. And then we are talking about things like gay marriage, pornography, these edge cases where, if you decide to opt out of gay marriage or make gay marriage illegal, you're doing it because you think there's going to be some sort of societal downfall. You realize that that's impinging on the rights of the gay individuals that want to get married, but you're making that sacrifice for the majority, for the greater good, right?
Fascinating and necessary debate that's breaking out among conservatives because it doesn't only have social implications in issues like pornography. I think the argument starts at pornography, but very quickly it ends up in the realm of economics, where you have people like Tucker Carlson suggesting that it's the job of the government to promote the common good, economically speaking, which is starting to sound indistinguishable from Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren in a lot of ways. And once you get to a common good government, what you're really talking about is a select few people who know best for the rest of us how exactly we ought to live our lives. Now, that sounds good if the select few is you, but if it's anybody else, it doesn't sound so good.
This all sounds like just total bullshit to me.
So how do you solve any of these moral questions then? You're just saying the government should just completely legislate all moral questions? Like, I don't understand the contention here.
Look, and the government can also enact policies that promote markets. So
No.
markets
I'm
make the
asking
decisions.
you. I don't
Oh,
understand your contention. How does the government solve any moral question? Is there, or is there, are you, because you're kind of like laying out a
no,
situ,
I'm saying, look, his determination that the government, when it makes laws, it's making decisions for you is, I mean, that's just a bunk argument because the government can make laws that, I mean, we have plenty of laws that set up like we have laws against monopolies, right? So that we can create a dynamic market that makes decisions, right? Those laws aren't the government making decisions for you.
well, okay. So if the government says a company can't exist as a monopoly or something, it is making a decision for those people that would want to make that monopoly, saying you can't do that. That's the government making the decision for you, saying that can't exist, right?
Yeah, from that perspective, yes.
Right. That's what he. Well, I'm assuming that's what he means. So if he says
But
like it,
he's saying that the government is in fact its own monopoly though.
well, it has not been force.
And it has the monopoly on the money supply as well.
Sure, and it has monopoly on legislative power. Now, obviously, it's I wouldn't necessarily call it a. I think simplistically referring it to as a monopoly isn't fair, or not. I wouldn't, it's not fair. Isn't accurate because generally, when you think of monopoly, you think of something that has control over a situation that can't be changed, and obviously, the government changes all the time because we live in a country where people vote to change what the government is and what the composition of the government is.
I'm just saying in some situations the government can choose winners and losers. In many other situations, it's creating an environment for the people to choose winners and losers, like a
I agree.
competitive environment,
I
which
agree.
Ben Shapiro is completely ignoring. He's basically saying anytime the government makes a law, it chooses winners and losers in every single law. And that's factually incorrect. That's
Well,
completely incorrect. Look, I got a sigh out of you.
I don't think that's well. Let me go back. Hold on. See what he exactly said.
The common good, economically speaking, which is starting to sound indistinguishable from Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren in a lot of ways. And once you get to a common good government, what you're really talking about is a select few people who know best for the rest of us how exactly we ought to live our lives. Now, that sounds good if the select few is you, but if it's anybody else, it doesn't sound so good. In other words, we're all fighting over one.
I mean, you agree with that, don't you? I'm confused as to what you're disagreeing with.
His conceptualization of government always choosing winners and losers, that any law chooses winners and losers.
Well, no, he didn't. First of all, he didn't say that, and I don't. When the government when there's a law, it is forcing an action upon citizens whenever a law is created,
Correct.
like
Yes.
just definitionally. So I mean,
Yes.
okay,
Yeah.
so that's not. I don't understand why you're disagreeing with that then, because you agree with that idea. I
It
mean,
depends.
obviously you
It
don't agree
depends
with,
on the
and nor do
specifics.
I agree with sort of like the kind of, oh, that means it's automatically a bad thing. Because obviously there's things that you want the government to regulate and to stop.
Look at the monopoly laws. Okay, we make monopolies illegal. Okay, that stifles the people who would want to have a monopoly. Right? Is that picking winners and losers, or is it creating an
It's doing
atmosphere
both.
where the market can choose winners and losers?
It's doing both.
Okay.
Because it's saying, because if the law didn't exist, then the people that create the monopolies would be the winners, and everyone else would be the losers. And if the government says you can't be in a monopoly, you could make the argument, well, it's kind of like choosing winners or losers because they're preventing this group of people from winning, they're preventing this group of people from losing, and they're making the markets, quote, more fair according to some moral standard that people agree in.
Is it a pro free market policy or an anti free
It's a
market
pro free
policy?
market policy. Yeah, of course.
And the government is doing it.
Yes.
Okay, so that's the contention, because I think Ben Shapiro would say anything the government does is against markets.
Well, okay, maybe in that context, but I would obviously disagree with that in the context. Sure.
Right. You're just saying that in this context, he's not saying that.
That was not my interpretation of what he was talking about. But
Okay. He's definitely casting the government as choosing winners and losers. I know those are my words, not his words, but
Right, but I guess I'm just confused, and I didn't expect
He made the
this.
switch to economics pretty quick.
I understand that, but I guess what I'm confused by is that I agree that the government needs to be restricted in terms of weighing in on certain moral questions, and that this kind of the culture and the attitude of America has been pretty largely rooted in like a far more libertarian perspective of like, okay, we're going to protect your individual rights and make sure you're not infringing upon other people's rights. But then beyond that, when it comes to other moral questions that don't involve infringing on other people's rights, as long as you're not like messing with someone else, you can essentially do whatever you want. Right.
Yes, I agree. I agree
Okay.
that the
Well,
government
okay.
should have a light touch. I don't agree with the characterization that anything the government does is picking winners and losers.
Okay. That's fine. That's fine. But I think you're being too hard on what he's saying because even if he's using different language, I think he's just trying to say that very idea I just said that I
Okay, let's listen to a little more. Let's see. Let's see if he goes more in my direction or your direction. I haven't listened to this. You've obviously listened to it though, so.
One government gun. The bigger the government gun is, the more it matters who controls it. The smaller the government gun is, the less it matters who controls it. And so what I have been promoting my entire career is that the government gun should be particularly small when you're talking at the federal level. I want to get into the specifics of this because, again, I think that the argument is being made about pornography, but really the argument isn't about pornography. It's about economics. It's about the role of government in life generally. And it is an argument between conservatives with regard to government, meaning they want to promote conservative goals using the government, and libertarians who say, no, you can't touch the government this way. Even libertarians who have conservative moral values like me, who believe that you have to rebuild that social fabric outside of government, the sort of James Madison view that if government gets involved with religion, it ends up actually hurting religion rather than helping religion. We'll get to all of that in just one moment. First, let us talk about how you are going to improve your
he's
smile.
going to do an asp.
Hilarious.
Justice to declare prosecution of obscene pornography.
Oh, wait. Okay. Too far.
Shapiro to get 75. Really has a pretty good article on the debate that is broken.
So just to pause here for a second, but you agree that the difference between like a quote conservative and a libertarian would be the libertarian conception of government role would be more aligned with government should only protect your individual rights. Government should only protect your rights from being infringed by other people. And then all other moral questions should essentially be up to you as long as you're not causing harm to another person. Where the conservative would be more like, no, we should be creating legislation on moral questions that go beyond just the sort of libertarian conception of infringing other people's rights.
Right. I'm on the libertarian side.
No, but you agree that that's like
question.
the correct, that's like the way that Bill, or
No,
sorry, the way that Ben is defining that you would kind of agree with that definition of things.
No, I think I'm super weary of the libertarians because I think the libertarians' ultimate goal is to shrink the government to nothing. So I think they're on a moral mission too. So when you're in that situation, who do you side with, the conservatives or the libertarians?
I'm not asking a question of who to side with. I'm just asking you if you agree with framing the conversation in that way of like the libertarian versus conservative frame.
Yes, the conservatives want to use the government to enact moral prescriptions on the population. The libertarians don't want to do that. But the moral prescription many libertarians are after, not all, but is to shrink the government to the point where it's ineffective.
Sure, that could be the case. And then I guess the second part of it, which is an interesting conversation, and I don't know if we know what the answer is with Ben, is the libertarian position could be rooted in two places. It could be a pragmatic.
Sitch, fix your internet, god damn it. If only Sitch had good internet. Wouldn't that be amazing? It would be great to have a show where he had excellent internet. Oh yeah, you're back.
Has it been breaking up at all? Like in the last like month?
No, I'm just I had to talk shit about your internet while you were out.
No, so there's two places of kind of this libertarian ideology. There's the pragmatic and there's the ideological. And Ben was kind of laying out the pragmatic one, which is that you don't trust the government. You don't, because, the government's obviously going to change between parties, and you don't necessarily want to have this big gun, aimed at you or against you in your moral considerations. So it's better to keep government power small in case, you'd have a disagreement with whoever wins the election. That's kind of like the more pragmatic argument, which I agree with, at
Yeah,
least
me
in
too.
that realms. And then there's the more ideological argument, which is, well, you just have an ideological belief that, like, no, it is morally not right for the government to infringe on people's freedoms even if you agree with whatever that moral prescription is, which is a stronger position because it's more rooted in something ideological versus pragmatic. Now, Ben is
True.
framing it in the pragmatic way, but I don't know if he's just doing that because he thinks it's more persuasive. He could still believe it from an ideological perspective and just doesn't argue from that way.
Right. Especially when you're out of government power. So,
Right.
Looking out among conservatives over pornography and the regulation thereof today. She says social conservatives are ready to launch a new national war on pornography. It's been nearly 50 years since the Nixon administration's war on porn, more than 2 decades since the signing of the Communications Decency Act, the first major federal effort to regulate online pornography. But pornography continues to be a target of Republicans at the state level. In addition, the 2016 Republican Party platform stated that pornography, with its harmful effects, especially on children, has become a public health crisis that is destroying the lives of millions. And by the way, I agree with every word of that. I do believe that pornography is a public health crisis that affects children in disproportionate ways. If you talk to teenage boys, it is really screwing them up in serious, serious ways, which is why I do believe in regulation of the distribution of pornography to people under 18. Once you're an adult, that changes. Hey, this fall, Republican members of Congress asked the Department of Justice to declare prosecution of obscene pornography a criminal justice priority. Conservative commentators also argue that government power can and should put a stop to pornography for the benefit of the so-called common good. By doing so, social conservatives argue that they can alter American culture itself. Okay, and this is the part where you start to shade over from the argument about pornography into the argument about the role of government generally. Is government there to, quote unquote, promote the common good, or is government there to protect rights that pre-existed government? This is particularly at the federal level. Is government there to protect rights that pre-exist government, and it does not have the ability to step into other areas, no matter how morally you think the government is acting when it comes to individuals? Now, again, I'm going to make a distinction between federal and local, because in local government, you have a lot more room to move in terms of what the government can regulate. Why? Because people can move, right? Once the federal government takes something over, then nobody has a choice anymore, right? This is why I famously suggested that if Beto O'Rourke got control of the auspices of government, of the federal government, and started to outlaw religious practice, basically, you'd have a civil war in the country. And if you go back and listen to the podcast where I talked about this, I said, okay, if it's outlawed in California, I move to Texas. If it's outlawed in Texas, I move to Idaho. And if it's outlawed across the United States, then you have a civil war, right? This is why there's a difference between the federal government and local governments. There's more homogeneity in local government. There's more generalized agreement in local government. And so you can more easily agree on how to regulate the public spaces. Okay, so Terry Schilling, executive director of the American Principles Project, a conservative think tank, argued in October in the Catholic magazine First Things that efforts to regulate pornography are part of a broader phenomenon. He said, in our time, a new conservatism is being born, one less interested in managing our nation's decline than in using political power to promote virtue, public morality, and the common good. And these are the kinds of words that actually put a chill up my spine when you're talking about the federal government, because the left uses exactly that same sort of language, of course, that the government is going to promote virtue. How? By banning churches. The government is going to promote public morality. How? With hate speech laws. The government is going to promote the common good. How? By withdrawing excessive amounts of wealth from the system and then redistributing them or regulating business into the ground, right? As soon as the government is in the business of promoting the common good, the obvious question becomes, okay, and who defines the common good? Now, conservatives will say, well, the left's been doing this all along. Why shouldn't we do it? And the answer is because the left shouldn't be doing it. And even if you agreed with what the left was doing, the left shouldn't be doing it. This is not the role of government. The founders did not set up the government in order to, quote unquote, inculcate virtue, to promote virtue or the common good. The idea was that the Lockean idea behind the founding of the United States.
If there's a common good, though, that 95% of the population agrees on, and there's only 5% outliers, Sitch.
Well, it depends what that common good is.
Fighting against cyber warfare.
Yep, sure. But what if it's 95% of the population wants to enslave 5% of the population?
No, obviously there that would not fly on the with the individual stuff. But I
Hmm.
mean, look, you can come up with a bunch of outliers, but if you're talking about something like clean water, not, there's going to be broad agreement on that. Why shouldn't
Sure.
government secure clean water for people?
Yeah, I
Why
agree.
does clean water add to the common good? Is
Yes,
that
but
like a common good thing?
100%. But if like you have a business or company or government polluting the water that's obviously that people are drinking, that's obviously affecting everyone else's health and well-being.
Yeah, just
And
there's
they don't
like
really have an option, where they shouldn't have to be like, well, I have to buy a specific water purifier because this asshole wants to pollute my water supply, right?
right, yeah.
So,
It's just
but
it's to live in a world where there is absolutely no common good. Like we have zero agreement on what the common good is. It's not true. It's not
well,
fucking true.
there are definitely moral questions. I mean, I agree with you from like a universal language perspective. It's not true. And I think
People want safety, security, they want affordable housing, they want fucking
sure.
clean
And
water, they want a safe environment for their kids. It's this isn't rocket science
I
here.
agree. And I think Ben has done himself a disservice by not clearly defining what he means when he says the common good moral questions. Um, and he kind of makes this interesting argument about sort of the difference between the federal and local government, which I like half agree with and half disagree with. I agree with the fact that obviously if, you're going to give states more power, like he's kind of basically saying you should give states more power to sort of enact more stringent laws because people can essentially move. Where in the federal sense, you can't really, you'd have to leave the country, which is significantly more difficult, and no one really wants to have to do that. Um, but I don't know if I kind of like agree with the concept, I understand the concept, but I don't know if I agree with in practice. I don't think that a state should be able to enact like very stringent moral regulatory laws just because you can move. Like it's better than if the federal government does it, but I don't think the state should be able to do it either. I don't think a state should be able to say, well, we've decided to enact prayer in school, or we've decided to ban pornography for everyone because we just think it's morally gross.
Look, I
Like,
only brought up the 95% because you're picking all these issues that are contentious, right? There are lots of different religions. Like, what religion are we going to pray to, right? Everybody needs clean water, right?
well, I understand, but
It's pretty simple.
the argument is around the contentious issues. It's not around these
Okay,
broad
so
agreements of like
saying
not murdering
so
people
you're
and not
saying he's
drinking.
taking like none of he's not talking about any of those broad issues. He's saying everywhere where there's broad issues that the government can possibly do good in the world, that's fine. The government
Well, I
doing
don't
those things
know.
is fine.
I don't
He's
know.
okay with that.
I have no clue. But
Okay.
the topic that he's talking about is pornography. So that's why I'm kind of thinking about it in those realms.
Okay, okay. So he's only yeah, okay. He's only talking about the edge cases. I've
Well, okay. Yeah.
well, I just look. I think Ben Shapiro is about government just getting like shrinking the government to the point of it being ineffective. So
Okay, well,
look,
let's hear.
don't you think conservatives broadly make the argument that government can't do anything right? That government is completely ineffective, that government is useless? Don't you think that's a broad argument
That's
that they
generally
make?
where conservatives have been landing for the last, 40, 50 years in this
Yeah,
country.
exactly.
Yes. Right.
Okay. So Ben Shapiro's making the government is useless argument right here.
Right, right. But there's still a difference between someone making that argument just because they disagree with the policies the government's enacting versus
Mhm.
someone disagreeing because they just think government shouldn't have the power to enact those like moral policies in the first place. And that's kind of
Right.
the
No, I get
difference
it.
of like that's what Ben is arguing here because he's saying, well, this is why I'm confused, is because he's seeming to say here that he doesn't think the government should be allowed to ban pornography unless he's going to make a difference and say the state government should, which he doesn't. I've heard the whole clip. He doesn't really go into detail if he's making some difference saying the state should be allowed to do it versus the federal government. But from what he's saying here, it sounds like he's saying he doesn't believe the federal government should be allowed to ban pornography.
Right.
Well, okay, let's jump to. So this happens a few days later. This is him kind of arguing with Matt Walsh about it.
Why don't we start with the take that has launched a thousand takes, and that is your take on pornography. So over the past few weeks, there's been this widespread debate that was launched because you talked about the outlawing of pornography at the federal level. First of all, why don't you lay out your position on what exactly federal law should be with regard to pornography?
Yeah, I think, well, there's two things here. There's what we could practically actually do, and there's ideally what should be done, and I recognize that those two things are separate here, because I don't think there could be a federal law just banning all pornography right now, especially with the way the Supreme Court has decided on this. I think that I think that there should be. I'd like it if there were, just like with abortion. I'd like that as well, but there can't be because of the Supreme Court. I think what practically could be done are enforcing, just like those, what really started this was the letter from the few Republicans urging the Department of Justice to just enforce obscenity laws that are on the books. I think that could be a good step. And then even further, things like, an opt-in option like some countries have, where you have to call your service provider, opt in if you want pornographic content, segregate the content to a separate part, .xx domain, things like that, and things, requiring, maybe you have to present ID or some sort of identification information if you want to access this material. These, I think, are basic steps that would, at a minimum, protect children, because that's been my focus with this, is that children are exposed to this so much, and the effect that has on them psychologically and emotionally, and in so many other ways. And
yeah, Matt,
I think that
I totally agree with this.
Okay, so how do you feel about any of those legislative options or changes?
Terrible. I don't think they're. Are they like? I've got to admit, I wasn't really paying attention. I was reading the chat more than anything. So,
Okay.
what are the legislation? I don't want to look. We're talking about pornography here. I don't want to if he's saying, look, we should ban kids looking at porn. I think we already have, right?
Well, yeah, technically, you're not supposed to look at pornography if you're under 18, but then the problem of enforcement always comes up, because it's not seemingly enforceable whatsoever on the internet.
Right.
Currently.
Yeah. Look,
right.
I'm for increasing the regulation around keeping pornography out of the hands of kids, obviously.
How would we do that?
Look, I have no idea. Why is it my job to figure it out?
Well, I'm just questioning, so if he's saying that adults should have to, I don't know, give some kind of identifying information to look at pornography on the internet, like a credit card or their license number or something, how would you feel about any of that stuff?
I guess, sure. Okay, go for it. I don't know. It's a pretty big problem, right? The kids, look, I'm not opposed to giving my personal information to buy pornography if it means pornography will stay out of the hands of all children. Like, I'm willing to do that. I know a lot of other people who are like, no, I don't give a fuck if the pornography gets into the hands of the kids. Like, they don't care. So they're going to be super chapped about something like that.
Well, there's two elements, which is the people that you're saying, people that don't care, number one, and people that just want to have, they do care, but they don't want their privacy infringed in order to implement some kind of protection for kids and pornography.
Look, it's a terrible problem.
Sure, but I don't know if there is a way. I mean, first of all, I disagree with his, you have to literally call the internet company to opt in. That's kind of silly. I mean,
I wasn't paying attention to the policy, so.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't agree with that.
What is the policy that he's promoting?
Well, he was kind of saying that either you should have to call into the internet provider to opt in to leave them look at porn, or to have some kind of identification that you have to type in to sort of look at porn.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious. You have to call in and talk to their beautiful secretary.
Hello, I would like to look at pornography. Please make it so I can look at it. But
you know why he's saying that should be the prescription, right? Because he's like, people won't do it then.
Right, because people won't do it, of course.
Yeah.
Right.
It's Matt Walsh, obviously.
Yes. I mean, to me, I don't have children, so I don't know how difficult it is to do this. To me, I think the better route, instead of saying, okay, the government is going to force it so that any website that possibly displays porn has to literally ask for someone's credit card information or their license or something to that effect. I think it would just make more sense if it's all browsers and all computers have to have adult, settings where a parent can just like make it so that they have a user profile set up for their child, that their child can't access those websites, which I thought those controls already exist. So, I mean, I guess kids could get around it if they know the passwords or something.
Why wouldn't
of
they
that
just put
effect,
their
but
parents' information in on
because
their
they wouldn't know their
computer?
parents' information. Oh, you mean like why don't they just like could they steal
Yeah, they could just
their
pull the
parents?
credit card out of their parents' purse and put the parents' information in,
Well,
and
that's why it would. That's a
voila,
good point,
look, you're
right? That's a
in.
good point. But that's why it would be better, in my opinion, to just have it so you'd have it so that the computers or the programs or the web browsers have to be set up so that the parents can just put in locks and controls to prevent kids from looking at porn through whatever their account, their login information is.
Well, look, again, we've hit up against a place where I think there's like 99% agreement in the population that the greater good is keep the porn out of the hands of children, right? We're arguing over how to do that without infringing on too many people's individual rights. But the broad policy, we all agree, the greater good is if kids didn't have access to pornography.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
So look, we agree on what the greater good is. It's not
okay.
picking winners and losers.
Sure, but why can't? Okay, fine. But I guess just talking about the pragmatic thing. Like, why do the parental controls not work, or is it just that most parents don't know how, like, don't have the technical savvy to know how to use them properly?
Yeah, my point is, if we had a magic button that made it easy, everyone would agree on what the policy should be. Keep the porn out of the hands of children.
Okay.
Everyone agrees on the
agree
policy.
With that, but
it's as clean as don't murder and clean water.
Okay, I agree. I agree. We're just talking about. I don't know. We're just talking about a completely different thing. I'm just talking about the pragmatics of it. As of now, I don't see why it would be required to have these like broad government regulations on porn, because I don't understand why the parental control options now just should work. I don't understand why they wouldn't work.
Okay.
Like the only legislation I would see that I'd be in favor of would be maybe make it so that if any site has pornography on it, it has to have some kind of code identifier to make sure that the parental controls will actually like identify it as having adult content and block it. Like that'd be like the only thing I think I'd be in favor of if that doesn't already exist.
Sure. But I mean, the more interesting conversation is conservatives don't want adults looking at porn. That's the more interesting conversation.
Well, sure.
Because that's where there is no agreement.
Right. And I would assume Matt Walsh doesn't want adults looking at porn, but he's not saying that as of here.
Of course, he's using the children argument because it's an argument 95% of people agree with.
Okay. I agree.
Hopefully it's closer to 99.9%.
Right.
I'm scared of the 5%. But
Actually,
I mean, you get what I'm saying, right?
I get what you're saying, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, I wrote an entire book back in 2005 that went largely ignored called Porn Generation about the impact that pornography was having on young men, in particularly the desensitization of men to how women ought to be treated, turning them into basically a series of body parts as opposed to treating them as holistic human beings, how this is part of the generalized sexual revolution. So one of the things that has been puzzling, Matt, has been sort of the breakdown to me between conservatives and libertarians over this issue. I consider myself more libertarian on governmental issues, but I don't think that the government has no role to play in protecting children from pornography. And in fact, I don't even think you need to make an anti-libertarian case in order to argue that pornography has significant externalities, particularly with regard to children. I'm sort of puzzled why so many libertarians are anti-cracking down on hardcore pornography's distribution to kids under 18, for example.
Because they're worried about their personal information being used in a database by the government to target them for some reason.
Right.
It's pretty obvious.
Yes.
You should know as a libertarian. What the fuck, man? Why are they against it? Just
Yeah, and especially those who would still identify in some way as conservative, because the thing is, obviously, you know, if this case was being made 30 years ago, if anything like internet porn existed 30 years ago, like it does today, and there were conservatives saying, hey, we need to crack down on this, pretty much everyone who calls themselves a conservative 30 years ago would have at least taken that argument seriously. Maybe not, they wouldn't, maybe not all have all agreed, but these days now you have conservatives just recoiling in horror at the very notion that the government would do anything about it, and that I find absurd. And I agree with you. There's been a
Recoiling in horror at the government doing anything of value. I wonder why they all have that position, Matt. It's not like the last 60 years didn't happen.
interesting discussion about is the government to protect the common good, or is it about preserving liberties? And I think that's an interesting discussion and fascinating, and we could have that debate. But I think that we don't even need really to get into that, because if you focus it on the fact that children are exposed to it, and because people like to say, well, people consent. If people choose to pursue this content, they consent to seeing it, so there's no role for the government. Well, I would say that children cannot consent. That's why we say that if an adult has sex with a child, it's rape automatically, no matter what the child said, because the child does not have the emotional and psychological capacity to consent. And if the child can't consent to be a second-party participant in a sexual act, I would say they can't consent to be a third-party participant as a witness. So every time a child is exposed to pornography, I would say they're being essentially abused by the person who put it on the internet, knowing that a child could access it.
Now, this did lead to a broader debate.
So, okay, wait. This is kind of annoying to me. So I think almost everyone agrees that like kids should not look at porn. It's not really a contentious take, right? But it's weird because then right at the very end there, Matt kind of slips in this take where he's like, I think it should apply to anyone who puts porn on the internet because potentially kids can have access to it. And that's kind of like a whoa, like hold the phone a second. Right? Like here, just listen again to what he said.
So every time a child is exposed to pornography, I would say they're being essentially abused by the person who put it on the internet, knowing that a child could access it.
It's like, okay, so you're saying knowing that a child could access it. Well, like that would mean that even if you have the porn, you put porn on a website and you're saying, okay, kids are not allowed to access it, but the kid does access it. Should that person be held liable for it? I don't think so. Not unless there's some kind of law of how it should be accessed that they're not that they're violating, that they're not upholding the standards to.
I mean, it makes the risk level go so high that porn doesn't exist, but that's his ultimate goal. So
right.
Obviously.
No, I right, but that's why it's the whole. It seems
it's
to
a
me
well-worn strategy.
Right. It seems to me kind of like silly that the conversation is focused on kids because everyone kind of agrees with that, but that's kind of the reason for the focus on kids.
That's what I said.
Yeah,
I was like, why are we talking about kids? The only reason we're talking about kids is so Matt Walsh can make his argument that we should ban all porn because of the children.
Right.
Like what he really wants to say is he wants to ban pornography from adults. That's what he wants to say, but he knows he can't say that. He'll be like, go fuck yourself.
That's why I don't know why he's saying it here.
Okay.
So.
Well, maybe this was a long time ago. Maybe he's like eased his way. He's like eased his audience into this, or found an audience that's in favor of this. So.
Matt Walsh says, I quote, I said porn should be banned and lots of people disagree. On Friday, I wrote to this was before he was on this appearance.
This clip is he said this before the thing.
Yes.
Okay.
This is what spawned this clip, I think.
Okay. So he's already made the declaration that he doesn't want adults to look at porn.
Yes.
Now he's saying this is a strategy to make porn illegal.
I guess, but that's why it's kind of obnoxious for him, because he wrote in the blog post and he said online that he's in favor ultimately of making all porn illegal, and yet when he's having the conversation with Ben, he's kind of like focusing on this, we got to stop it from getting the kids. It's like, okay, well, no one disagrees with that, right?
Yeah, of course.
So that's
why he's making that argument.
On Friday, I wrote about a group of Republican lawmakers who are calling on the DOJ to fight the proliferation of hardcore pornography by enforcing existing obscenity laws. I support this effort and would like to see it taken even further. Ultimately, I believe that internet porn should be illegal.
But he said internet porn. He didn't say pornography.
Well, okay. I'm assuming he means all. I don't know if he's making just specific.
Why? No, obviously he's only talking about internet pornography.
Okay. Well, regardless.
Why would he say internet pornography if he meant all pornography?
I guess that's a good point. I don't know.
Yeah, he's saying that internet is the access point where kids are getting it, which is true.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right.
When they had pornography in the liquor stores and you had to show your ID to buy it, kids weren't getting access to it.
Right.
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 Yeah. So he's making a distinction there. He's not he's not in favor of banning all pornography from adults.
Maybe. I don't know.
He's sticking with the kid argument.
I wouldn't be surprised if he said in another place that he's just
Okay.
against porn. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know.
Look, I don't want to misrepresent him.
I agree.
J-Mac says, yeah, DVDs are fine. Yeah, that's my take too. Let's read some of these super chats.
So he said, wait, hold on. In his video specifically, he said, I argued for banning pornography in mid-September. I argued, as I have in the past, I believe probably on this very show, that hardcore pornography should be illegal. I argue that, in fact, you do not have a God-given natural right to post your sex videos on a public forum. You do not have a God-given natural right to view them. I argue that both of those things are privileges, and privileges we should not be granted because the proliferation of hardcore porn is not in the common good, and to be even more specific, it is destroying children.
Look, he's
so it sounds
saying,
like there he's saying porn in just general, but
well, and he's appealing to the common good, which is pretty funny. So
right.
But anyway, yeah. So he's in favor of softcore porn.
Oh, there you go. He's always against the hardcore porn.
Well, that's what he said. Look, also there's yeah, look.
Patrick Mogan 5 Canadian says, when will you guys talk to Destiny again? It's been almost a year since last time. There's so much to debate with him. Have Anna on to talk to him.
Well, look.
I mean, I don't know. If Anna wants to talk to him, she can on herself. Like, I don't know if she wants to talk to him. Maybe she could just do that, but.
Is this a trick? Is this, are you trying? Look, if Anna wants to talk to Destiny, obviously she can.
Right.
Like, are you asking us to get Destiny and Anna together? Like, we're, I don't know, matchmakers?
Right.
That's a little bizarre, but anyway.
Batman's Pet Goldfish for $5 says, no, a constitutional republic is not a democracy. You have a constitutional republic where the reps are appointed or inherited, not elected. Well, I guess you could theoretically have a constitutional republic that isn't a democracy, in theory. But every democracy, I think, in the world that is essentially a type of constitutional republic. So it just seems kind of goofy to me for people to kind of like hone in on the distinction. If
the leaders are appointed by some elite class, what is the difference between a republic and an oligarchy? Tell me that. What's the difference?
I guess it would only be... I don't know. I guess I don't know then. Yeah.
Yeah. Look,
what is the technical difference? Yeah.
I mean, I've heard people say a republic is a nation of laws. Yeah, I agree. That the law is above the elites. There is no aristocracy that is above the law. If that's the idea of a republic, hell yeah, America is a republic.
Well, actually, I don't.
But we're also a democracy.
Wait.
So you can't say, look, we're not a democracy. We're a republic.
And it says, according, yeah, but okay. I think the super chat might be wrong because it's saying, according to the Wikipedia, it's saying a republic means that the representation is from the public. That would seem to imply it can't just be like an oligarchy, that you can't just have, like, there still has to be some voting for the representative inherent in a republic. It can't just be like appointed positions necessarily by, a king or something.
God, why must we argue definitions?
I agree. The whole conversation is fucking stupid because it's people arguing phrases and definitions as opposed to arguing concepts. I agree.
What is the point?
I don't know what the point is. Right.
Yeah. Every time I hear somebody say America is not a democracy, it's a republic, I feel like we need to call the short bus, load them up, send them off for education.
Right. J-Mac, our second follow for $10 says, I think you guys fundamentally misunderstand why Republicans hammer on the republic versus democracy position. We do.
We fully, yeah.
So I guess what we're
Educate
asking
us.
is, what is the point of bringing this up? J-Mac says, I
Aside
know the
from
point.
definitions.
What is the point, Jay? Tell us what the point is, because I want to know, because I don't understand the point. Brian for $10 says, Adam,
hold on. I think the point is to say Republicans kick ass and Democrats suck. Nanny, nanny, boo boo. I think that is the point in 95% of the people who bring this up. So, Jay, if there's another point, you can make whatever it is, but I think you're in like the 5%. I think most people are just doing this to play word games and fuck around.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Me wrong.
Like, I wouldn't be surprised if that's like the majority of people, because of this, the way the names are associated with the parties. So,
yes, they're playing party politics just for fucking no good reason.
Brian for $10 says, Adam, I disagree. Everything mentioned is something that the local and state government handle. Clean water. The federal government can give money if the states decide to go along with the federal plan. Well, no, there's federal regulations on
of course,
environmental regulations. What do you mean? I'm not.
How clean the water can be is dictated from the EPA.
Right. Are you saying that you think it should be the state government that handles that instead of the federal government? Because right now it's both, but there are federal restrictions, obviously.
Yeah.
J-Mac for $20.
I think the EPA monitors the local governments that are supposed to be doing to make sure they're doing a good job. Otherwise, they'll cut off federal funding for this or that.
J-Mac, or thank you so much, our surrogate father, for $20 says, what if the ensuring clean water is the government saying they have oversight over my irrigation, or that my ground well is illegal, or that half my water is to be confiscated and redistributed? These issues are not so simple.
Yes, look, I agree, and this is the same exact thing as the pornography discussion. I am saying that the broad policy that everyone wants free water, or everyone wants clean water, or we don't want children to have access to pornography, I'm saying everyone broadly agrees on that. They want that. They're like, a common good would be children don't get access to dirty pictures. A common good would be everyone has access to clean water, right? I'm saying that the common good is not, we're not arguing over what the common good is. We're arguing how the details of how to get that common good to everyone. You understand that distinction, right, Sitch?
I understand, yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, obviously, when we're having a conversation about what it constitutes the government's ability to regulate clean water, then obviously when you get into the nitty gritty of what that entails, there's going to be disagreement, and that's, where you vote and have legislation about that.
Right, but I think the disagreement is going to be more along the lines of, well, what if the 95% wants to enslave the 5% and have them do all the labor?
Right, but to be clear, you're only saying that the thing that you were talking about that you were saying was simple is just like the general idea that people want to be able to drink fucking water that's clean. Yeah. But then obviously that's going to be more complicated when you break down into these specifics about how that's going to be managed and what that's going to look like.
Right, and a lot of the contention between the anti-government types, the free market crusaders, and the more pro-government types is how to provide that common good that everyone agrees on the most efficiently.
Okay.
Yeah.
Option C for $20 says, I do agree and have thought you guys really don't understand how right-wingers think and talk. So far, I disagree with most everything you guys have said. I am sure this shocks both of you. Okay. I mean, we can have you on and like you can explain autocracy, because I just feel like you always send super chats where you just say that, but then it's like, I don't know, like, doesn't mean anything. So if you want to come on and talk about it, I'd be interested to know, like, what is the thing that you think that we're missing, right?
Yeah, look, and I think, everyone always gives us, it's so funny. So many people on the left give us a hard time because we have a lot of right wingers in our audience. But I mean, I think we have a lot of right wingers in our audience because we broadly get your arguments correct, and we don't straw man the shit out of right wingers, which I mean, so many YouTubers do. So I mean, when we get this argument from right wingers that we don't understand right wingers, I just think, well, the evidence is against you.
Daniel
Anyway,
Sake for 13 months says, "Yay, I'm 18. My co-host steals from my diction. Yay, I'm 18. I think elves have weird penis ears. Yay, I'm 18. Of course, I know how to use chopsticks."
I can't tell if you're actually 18 though, but that is a funny
There you
super
go.
chat. So thanks for sending it. And look, who
Yeah.
who likes penis ears? Come on, guys,
There you go. There you
get
go.
with the program.
Lord of the Nerds decided to come on a different account because he's so desperate to pay money for a super chat I'm not going to read. So, I mean, if you want to keep sending super chats that I'm not going to read, that's fine, Lord of the Nerds. But there you go. RBGH fan for $10 says parents should be accountable for their kids, not the state. People who mix ideology with government are inherently authoritarian. TikTok is a good example. Save the kids, but really it's ideological. Yeah, I mean, I think in most cases I would agree with that. Parents should be accountable for their kids overall.
It's this. I mean, this touches on what we were talking about and Ben's argument about how government can be small if the population is, you know, a God-fearing population that doesn't want to commit a bunch of crime or put upon one another.
Mhm.
But there's like efficiencies that are gained from that are just they're undeniable, right? You can shrink the size of government. You can shrink the investment costs in security by setting up a system where people are oriented on the same page. But this whole idea that, you know, parents should be accountable for their kids in an environment where everyone is on different pages, everyone's trying to influence your kid in a different direction for their own personal gain or purpose. You fucking that's like the equivalent of you know, an environment where marauders can come by and steal all your stuff. You're stuck at home guarding your stuff all day long. Like, what kind of society is that to live in? So this idea that you yourself can live in some caustic environment for raising kids, and you have to suck it up and be accountable, and you just got to run around with your hands over your kids' ears and eyes at every turn. Like, what kind of society is that to live in?
Yeah, but it depends on. Okay, but I think we can have a general principle of like, on average, for most like the tendency should be towards parents being held accountable for their kids. That doesn't mean that there can't be any regulation whatsoever. I'm just saying I think that should be the tendency that you start with. You start with the idea that parents should be responsible for their kids, not the government, and then but then there can be further things to, you know, move on. Right? Like,
look at this.
do you think that the government should be saying, okay, no, you know, we think that the social contagion for transgender stuff is too high, so therefore we're going to make it illegal for anyone to appear who's transgender on YouTube because we think it's going to like make kids think they're trans?
We
like,
could make it illegal for teachers to talk about that shit in the classroom. Yeah, I'm for that. Definitely. I think the science backs that up. This super chat, I mean, look, you could say security should be, people should be accountable for their own security, not the state. The reason why that's a laughable statement is because we understand the costs of everybody being responsible for their own security, right? That's the whole point of having a night watchman state, as the libertarians like to say, that protect
right, but
our
hold
security.
on. I want to go back to the example that you gave because I agree with you that teachers shouldn't be talking about this stuff in school.
In the classroom, no, they shouldn't.
Right, but my position on this is because, like, it's public school. The point is, it's supposed to be teaching children of all ideological walks of life about, you know, academic things and, you know, writing, you know, arithmetic, science, you know, all you know, these things. It's not really supposed to be like pushing a political message one way or the other, especially on contentious topics that there is broad disagreement on, like abortion or like trans issues or something to that effect, and that the public teachers are government workers. That's why they shouldn't be pushing it. So I agree with that.
Okay.
But I don't think I would agree with the government saying, well, you can't have trans people talk about trans stuff on YouTube, a private citizen talking on a private platform because kids may be able to access it. Like, I wouldn't agree with that.
Yeah, obviously, and that infringes on the individual rights of the trans people.
Right.
who want to start their YouTube channel and talk about this shit. Yeah, no, I agree.
Okay.
So, but the broadness of parents should be accountable for their kids, not the state, kind of ignores how the state kind of meets people 85% of the way. And, you're responsible for 15, like the 15% response accountability that you're taking for your kids is manageable because it's only 15%, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in an environment where the kid, the school teachers can talk to your kids indiscriminately about trans stuff and nobody's stopping that, then you literally can't be accountable for your kids unless you pull them out of public school, pull them out of private school. Like, let's say you can't even find a school where they're not talking about it. Then you're homeschooling. Which, sure, homeschooling, a lot of people do homeschool, but you got to admit that's a much higher bar than just putting your kid in school. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It's closer to protecting your own shit and not calling the cops.
Right.
Do you agree with the broad point that I'm making that, a lot of times I think government meets people 85% of the way and it just gets ignored. Right?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
I do agree with that. Yeah.
So it's easy to hire private security because we're pretty close to safe, and we need a private security guard to
I guess
get us to
depending where
that.
you live, right?
Yeah, no, and it fluctuates, obviously.
Right.
Like there are places where government is an utter failure, and I acknowledge that. Yeah. So I just this whole idea that, and I think it's a reflexive, and I totally understand it. I totally dig it. I'm like, government takes out of my paycheck too. I'm forced to pay taxes. I fucking hate that shit. I think taxes are way too high. I think chances are we could literally cut taxes in half for the middle class, and it would be a boon to the economy, and we really wouldn't suffer any downside at all. So I think taxes are too high. Taxes at a certain point are theft. I don't think taxes just philosophically are theft, but at some point they are high enough that they do become theft.
Right. J Microsecond followed for $10. Thank you so much. Says, so that deck of cards with 70s porn stars I bought in Hawaii when I was 13 are still fine in Matt's book. Interesting. There you go.
Well, if it's soft core, I guess. That's great. Yeah. Look, no. It's good to make that distinction, I think.
Brian for $20 says, thank you. Says, need good faith when it comes to Walsh. He might want to make porn illegal in general, but he's talking about children not to lie, but to make an argument where there's wide agreement. That's how you get things done. Yes, okay. I agree and disagree with you, because the question is, I guess the question is, okay, is he talking about the children just because he would rather that be like, he'd rather that than nothing? Or is he using children as a shield because he wants to crowbar in an avenue to make it illegal for everyone? Right. That would be sort of the two different versions of reality that we're talking about. Now, I would guess, now I can't read his mind, so I don't know the answer to that question, but we do know that he wants to make it broadly illegal for everyone. To me, talking about the children seems irrelevant because everyone agrees that children shouldn't, or not everyone, but most people seem to agree that children shouldn't be looking at hardcore pornography generally. And as I said, there seems to already be parental controls in place to prevent that from occurring. So I'm not sure exactly why we would need stricter government regulation on that topic. Unless those parental controls were failing for some kind of, as I said, for some sort of technical reason, which then you could sort of force pornographic websites to put in some kind of coding that it can be picked up on, these sorts of things so that parents can regulate it.
Right.
Brian for $10. Thank you so much, Brian. Says, because, I think this is the Republic versus Democracy thing. Because Democrats often claim that democracy is great and more of it is better, but we say, no, we are a democratic republic because we point out the check and balance of the two.
Everyone I hear who says that we're not a democracy, we're a republic, they don't say we're not a democracy, we're a democratic republic. They leave democracy completely out of it.
Well, a
Because I'm
constitutional
usually
republic. Right.
I'm usually saying, yeah, but we're a democratic republic. They're saying we're not a democracy, we're a republic. And I'm like, we're a democratic republic. And they're like, no, we're a republic. Like it's just stupid word games. I'm like, they got me again. I'm arguing with an idiot.
Mm-hmm.
Why? I know people are going to be super offended by this because people make this argument. And I'm literally saying this argument is stupid and you should stop making it. I'm not calling you an idiot. I'm saying it's a dumb argument.
Right.
Look,
Well,
and
people should just make the argument that's the point, I guess, as opposed to fixating on the words.
yes. Yeah. Tell me. Tell us why. Tell us the substance of the argument.
I think what Brian is saying is he's saying that like the Democrats are trying to make a specific argument about. I'm guessing that's what Brian is saying. The Democrats are trying to make a specific argument that they want to like have wide policy changes simply by people voting for them, and the Republicans are saying no, they want elected representatives to have more power to curtail and make decisions about what policies to implement. Is that what you're saying? Because that would be the distinction, right?
Those
But
elected representatives are elected by democracy.
I don't. Well, hold on. Because that would be the distinction between the democracy and the republic. But I guess where I'm still confused by what you're saying, Brian, is that I don't really hear either Democrats or Republicans making that argument. In fact, I feel like it's the opposite. Usually I hear Republicans sort of complaining about like when I hear someone complain about an unelected official did XYZ, it's almost always a Republican complaining, like, oh, this unelected official doing this, thing. And they're kind of more complaining about they want things to be more in the hands of, the voters. So I guess I don't feel like anyone's really making the Democrat versus Republican argument. Shady Durek says it's a counter to the point, quote, in a democracy, this thing should happen. If the US isn't a pure democracy, the argument is invalid. I think you're right that that's sort of the way it's being leveraged.
Yeah, that's smart.
But it just doesn't make any sense like on a actual argumentative level. So that's why I think I do agree with that, and that it's just people should just stop focusing on the argument because it just seems like a waste of time.
But this is not a democracy because I can play a word game, even though substantively it is totally a democracy.
Right. Well, it's kind of like
nothing is going to change that.
Well, it's like the person making the original thing saying we should have X because it's democracy is making a word argument too. And then it's like, well, I'm going to counter your bad word argument with my own bad word argument by saying, well, we don't live in a democracy. We live in a republic.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, Brian, for $10, thank you. Says, my point on the water is that while the EPA may have regulations on how clean the water must be, about how the get there comes from the state and local government. Oh, okay. That is true. That is true.
Right.
Yeah. That makes sense. That's the way it should be.
Yeah, okay. They figure out the details. I get it. Yeah, that's important.
Because you want people closer to the ground and the source to handle the logistics because they're going to have a better idea of how to do it than like someone, in a different state. Ryan Owl for $20. Thank you. Says regulations like age restrictions or other things I think would be great, even though they're bypassed easily. I find it to be destructive to one's mind, but ultimately it is a person's free will to decide. Great show as always. Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like once you're past 18, that's it's up to you, right? But I think when you're under 18, I guess for me it should be if you're. When you're under 18, it's your parents have a lot more broader authority about your behavior, and I think looking at pornography should be something your parents have the ability to control if they don't want you to look at porn. So, Mr. Ubercross, thanks so much for $20, Mr. Ubercross. Says it's not just that it's inefficient to have individuals always pay for their own security. People also could free ride on other people's paying for private police. 9 out of 10 people could pay and one gets the benefit for
true.
Free. That is true.
Excellent point. Yes.
Blaine's Escape Quarter for $5 says on the security concern, cops don't stop crime. They show up later and file reports. You are 100% responsible for your security.
Look, yeah, that's not true.
I don't agree with that because I think, in Actual Justice Warrior talks about this a lot. Like, I understand what you're saying. Like, in the moment of you being victimized by a criminal, like, we don't have the Minority Report precog police, right? You're responsible for your safety. But when I watch a lot of like actual justice warrior videos, and Sean's kind of talking about this, and I think it's true, policing does affect future crime by having, police have the ability to get rid of criminals, the Justice Department to get rid of criminals, to get them off the streets, to put them in jail, as opposed to just letting them like get arrested and then just be released, and not charging people for significant, like for these like quote minor crimes and things of that nature. That allows those people to then go out into society and to keep re-victimizing more and more people. And now, so if you had stronger laws, if you got rid of a lot of this sort of woke justice reform issues, that would 100% be like, I guess you would say it's not the cops' Justice Department, so maybe that's the distinction you're making, but I'd say it's kind of like all ties in together. So,
Right, yeah. Getting criminals off the street. There's 5% of the population that they're just going to be criminals. There's nothing you can do about it. The best way to deal with it is to get them off the streets, incarcerate them so they cannot continue to victimize new people. So,
sure.
Yeah.
AKA Batosai for $5 says, Adam, I say we are a republic because a lot of people want to have general elections based on a pure popular vote. Well, okay, that might be why people are kind of fixating on that sort of distinction.
It doesn't change the fact that you're literally voting.
I know, but I'm just saying that I still think it's a dumb argument, but I'd understand like if that's why people are kind of fixated on making those arguments.
It's not a
just say that they want to have.
Yeah,
I know, but then they should just say, well, instead of arguing democracy versus republic, just argue that you want to have, get rid of the electoral college or not. It'd be more accurate. But.
Just say that you want a minority of citizens to decide who the president is.
Somebody for $2 says Republicans/conservatives make the quote, it's not a democracy, it's a democratic republic, because Democrats, progressives, and socialist types frequently point to democracy words to remove things like the Senate and electoral college. Right.
So look, if you're making that argument in the context of that issue, it completely undercuts your argument because it's not true. It's not credible.
Well, it's not like a. So this would be my response. If someone's making a stupid word argument, so we kind of see this with the left when they kind of make the trans women or women argument, they're just trying to argue with labels and word thinking and definition games. They're not actually making an argument based on a concept. If someone's making a stupid word label argument, I don't think it actually helps you to make a stupid word response.
Yeah, I agree.
I think it's better for you to just say, well, what do you mean? Like to actually get them to make the conceptual argument. I mean, I think actually the best thing to do is to call them out and say, you're just making like a useless, vapid word argument, like make an actual argument based on a concept. Don't just like try to change the definition of things. I think that's the best way to handle a situation. But I think you're right that that's why these distinctions come, is that it's just seen as like a rhetorical response to that argument, even though it doesn't technically make sense. Somebody for $20, thanks so much, says, check my other Streamlabs for at least my answer to the whole word democracy, democratic republic, not democracy argument. Well, thank you. And thank you for the $20. But I think your argument is correct. I think that is why it has kind of evolved the way it has. What'd you say, Adam?
I thought you were reading Ostracy's super chat, but I realized you weren't.
Arithmus for $2 says the reason people argue over the republic label is that the Democrats tend to morally appeal to democracy as a justification for doing things that are unconstitutional. So the rebuttal is to appeal to the constitutional republic. Interesting.
Really?
Okay.
What are they saying democracy gives them the right to do that's unconstitutional?
Right. I guess I would be curious as to, like, I understand your argument, but it's hard for me to think of an example of what that would be. I guess like getting rid of guns, if someone wants to just get rid of guns or something. Like when they say, oh, the majority of people want to get rid of guns or whatever, and you say, well, and right to bear arms.
The electoral college issue is that's a tough one for me because I don't know how it will affect our elections. And our elections are this institution that has some level of stability in society that people are used to. And a radical change could threaten our political balance at a time when seem particularly polarized. But it does bother me that someone can lose the popular vote and still become president. What's your thinking on that?
Well,
Seth?
my take on it has always, well, whenever we've talked about it, has been that I'm fine keeping the Electoral College, but I think it's retarded that we have winner take all from a state perspective. That doesn't make any sense.
Oh
Because
yeah,
the
yeah,
point of the
yeah.
Electoral College is supposed to be, or at least there's actually multiple points. The original point was because like the states were technically supposed to be voting for president, but nowadays most people don't like have that kind of state association or really view state power seeming to work in that way. Even if that's the way it works, they don't kind of view it that way. And the argument that's generally given for the Electoral College is that you don't want like if it's just on pure popular vote, the very populous states, which tend to be blue on average, except for like Texas and Florida, I guess,
Yeah, are going
um,
to
are
destroy
right, are
basically.
just going to destroy, the minority of people. It's not like a huge minority, but or a huge majority, but it's going to destroy, Republicans' ability to win elections. Period. Like to be completely, frankly, flatly real, the only reason people have this conversation is because people on the left want a popular vote. Like 99% of people who have this conversation on the left, they want to do it because then they'll make it easier for them with them to win elections. And people to the right don't want it because they'll make it harder for them to win elections. It's a purely just
Yeah,
depending on the results, right?
yeah.
It's not like a
I
principled
I agree.
like
I
position.
agree.
But putting that all aside, my take, which I try to actually be principled, is to say I acknowledge the concern, and it seems legitimate to me that people would say, "Hey, I don't want the majority to be able to just crush the minority necessarily in an election, in a presidential election. So there should be some level of uh, friction against that, some pushback against that. And that's what the Electoral College is supposed to be. And I agree with that position on an ideological level. But I think the way it exists now is stupid because the way it's manifested is to say, oh, well, we have a winner take all for almost all the states except for two, which doesn't make sense because then all that does is it means the majority in a state essentially overrule and destroy and take over the minority in that state. It doesn't actually fix the problem. It just shifts it down from the federal to the state level. So my position is that keep the electoral college system, but make it so that every state has to actually give out their electoral votes
Proportionally,
via the
yeah.
breakdown of the state's vote. So
Yep.
if, the majority of if it's like 51% vote for Joe Biden and 49% vote for Donald Trump, instead of all those states' votes going to Biden, you give, you know, half plus one to Biden and you give,
Yeah,
the
you
remaining to
portion.
Trump, right?
Yeah,
Right. It should be based on a proportion of the popular vote in the state. That's the way I think it should work.
right. Yep. Yep. Then the electoral college will actually be closer, much closer. Yes.
Right.
You'll have the same thing going on with the electoral college that you have going on with the popular vote,
Right.
where it's
Because
like
then, yeah.
49-51.
Right. Because then, yeah. Because then it'd be much closer. And then you'd be sort of holding fast to the principle and the spirit that you're trying to help the minority not get crushed. But, it would actually kind of, in my mind, make more sense. So.
Yeah, the electoral college is what is allowing Republicans to get crushed.
Well, part of the problem with the way the electoral college is now is that since it's winner take all, it basically makes it so that presidential candidates can just ignore entire states because they say,
Right.
oh, like Republicans go, oh, I know I can't win California. It's a waste of time for Donald Trump to campaign in California. Or it's a waste of time for Donald Trump to campaign in New York or I don't know, some state that's like a blue state. And then the reverse is true. If there's some state that they know is a red state, there's no reason for a Democrat candidate to waste their time campaigning there. But if you did it this way, no state should be ignored because it would actually make sense. A candidate could potentially pick up votes anywhere. And that would also make it so that presidents would actually care more about all the states, as opposed to only caring about states that are like their stronghold states.
Yeah, I meant the electoral college is what's allowing Republicans to get crushed in certain states like California. And I do think it dissuades a lot of Republicans from voting in the state when they know, okay, the California is just going to go, all the electors are going to go for the Democratic candidate no matter who votes. Right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
But if it was more apportioned, California would obviously be competitive. It's one of the largest states.
Yeah.
And the California does have quite a few Republicans. So
True.
it would stop discouraging those Republicans from voting in the blue states. Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if voting turnout would increase for the president substantially if this was
Yeah.
changed.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So I think, that's a great argument that the Electoral College is hurting the Republicans, actually.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, as it's structured now, not get rid of it completely, obviously. We don't want to go down to the popular vote, but apportionment
right.
electors is the way to go. Yeah. You've convinced me. I agree.
Okay.
I think Ostracy said he would come on and
Sure. Send him the link.
he says, I will come on and explain my opinion, especially the whole democracy versus republic. I think I sent you a DM on Twitter. Ostris is your Twitter name, so I can send you a link there if you want to come on.
Yes. Blank Escape Corner for $5 says, I'm more against the line, quote, government does 85%, you do 50%. The government can do 85%, and you're still responsible for 100% of your own stuff. I guess at the end of the day, that's true, but like you still want the government to like protect its citizens, right?
This is why people want to live in good neighborhoods. This is why people move to neighborhoods where there are better schools, because they're like, my tax dollars are going to support a school that's not a piece of shit. Right? Like environment matters.
I'll be right back.
Okay. Environment matters. So obviously, the idea that the government isn't a giant component in what that environment is that you live in, the policy environment and the actual tangible environment. It's I don't understand why people fight against that when it is a reality that we live in. So AKA Batosi said for $10 says, the other reason I point out republic is that people want to overlook that we are a union of 50 individual states. They want all their issues being sweeping federal decisions. Yeah, no. The whole idea, like, democracy is a component of state governments. It's a component of city governments. It's a component of all governments. The idea that democracy doesn't exist. The only thing I object to, like if you just changed it, if you said, we are not solely a democracy, or we are not just a democracy, I think I would immediately see that as credible. But it does seem like there is a faction out there who just wants to undermine the idea of democracy. They believe democracy is mob rule, and they don't like democracy. They think democracy needs to get shit canned. So
that's true.
Yeah. So I do think a lot of people making this argument are in that camp.
I had an interesting thought when I was up for a second, which is that, supposedly like in Japan, the government, I don't know if it's the government or just the culture. It's like a different attitude towards like calming people, like it's like a cultural or government attitude of like calming people down, supposedly. So like the Japanese news will be very different than American news, because American news is all like, oh my God, like the world's on fire, right? But in Japanese news, everything's like very like chill and calming, because it's trying to like keep everyone like chill. And on one hand, it's like, okay, maybe people are and so I guess the argument would be, well, is it better to have that system because then people will be happier, even if it's like an infringement on our freedom, essentially.
It's an infringement on the freedom of the conflict entrepreneurs that want to keep you wound up so fucking
no,
tight.
because it's like, if the government is sort of essentially being like, we need to like restrict real information from people in order to keep people like chiller, but then everyone's happier, right?
Look, I don't.
But then the other end of that is in America, where it's like the opposite. People are actually making money. They're using their freedom to make money because they know it'll hype everyone up, and that's what will get people to like watch, right?
Yeah, and I think we would have a much different society if media was forced to mirror the reality of the actual environment. So you weren't seeing, like, if you watched a news broadcast, you were seeing a more realistic picture of the environment that you
I think
live
that'd be
in.
too difficult to enforce. Like I agree in concept, but I don't know how that would exist. Like
Well,
pragmatically
I agree. Like, it could really only
or
exist in
logistically, I
kind
should
of a
say.
thought experiment.
Right, right.
But
I
the
should say
point of the
logistically.
thought
Yeah.
experiment
Right.
is to say that everyone is putting a thumb on the scale for their own interests, right? You're saying the
Mhm.
Japanese government is putting a thumb on the scale to make people think nothing bad is going on anywhere ever, to chill them out. Our news media is putting a thumb on the scale to make people believe everything is on fire and they have to watch the news because it's, we're in a dire situation and they need information, right?
Right.
Everyone's using it
Right.
to talk their book, sell their product, whatever they're doing. If
Hmm.
we could get a more realistic picture of society, I think people would be more chill.
Right, right, right.
Yeah.
Hello, Ostracy. You're muted though.
Oh.
Say something so we know your audio's working.
Hello.
Have
What's
you been
up?
on before? Have we talked to you before?
No, I don't think
Okay.
so.
I don't
I
think so
almost
either.
came on once when you were doing your MMT talk.
Okay. Well, you're obviously a huge MMT critic, so.
I feel like that's a little unfair. You've moved me a lot on MMT, actually.
Really?
Oh, really?
Okay, well,
Oh,
that's
tons,
nice.
yeah.
That's nice
I-
to hear you say then.
I've moved from it's dumb to I understand it
Here comes a
philosophically,
joke.
but I don't think it's applicable.
Okay.
Okay.
Like, it's a
well,
bad narrative. I think if you gave people the power to kind of say, you can print money kind of as long as inflation and production is good, like, I just don't think that that's going to work when you give that power to people. They're going to say, oh, of course it'll justify it, don't worry. And then
Right.
you'll end up in a big problem. But philosophically, like as a formula, I kind of agree.
Okay.
I
I
think
like
that's
it.
a completely fair critique.
So do I. Yeah, yeah. Look,
Yeah.
and so you're saying obviously the narrative that people have is incorrect, but it is restraining their darker urges to some extent.
Yeah, you need like the balance, right? So the
Right.
kind of like the deficit people, right? They're kind of
Mhm.
like, oh, deficit bad, deficit bad. And that kind of puts a leash on the people who are like, well, don't worry, we'll get the production, it'll be there, it's justified, don't worry about
Right.
it. Right. And it's kind of like that battle needs to exist or it won't really work
Well,
out that
Right.
well.
Okay.
I
So-
agree.
The
I
dead is a
agree with
useful
that.
fiction.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that's
Gotcha.
kind of where I've moved on MMT. And before, when you first said it, I was like, that's dumb. So you've moved me
Cool.
along.
Okay. Look
Cool.
at that. Okay, so what's the democracy versus republic thing?
So some of after I superchatted, some of the people in the chat said it was basically it is an argument kind of against an argument that the Democrats are making,
Mhm.
and I think that's really the important part because as many people were pointing out, like the Democrats have kind of made this attitude of mob rule is American. So when you say things like the electoral college should go because it's not democratic, it is correct that it's not democratic. It's not supposed to be. If democratic means majority wins. So principally, it's supposed to be that way. So when you kind of say, hey, it needs to go because it's not democratic, you're basically kind of arguing against a lot of the kind of systems of the American government that are literally designed intentionally not to be that way.
Well, I
And
mean, isn't it? I mean, the electoral college it can be in a democratic country. So it just seems like it'd be to me to be a better argument to just say, well, no, you're just wrong. You can have an electoral college in a democracy. Democracy doesn't just definitionally mean that everything is a direct vote. That's not what democracy means.
but that's the principle Democrats are using.
Right, but they're just using the word and the definition like wrong.
Right. So if they're going to
Yeah.
use this as the definition of democracy, and they do this throughout, they've done this with Supreme Court, the Senate,
Mhm.
Electoral College, then that's where it's just important to say, well, this is why we aren't one. Right. That's the reason. Like,
Yeah, but I get what you're saying. To me, I think it'd be better to just say, well, you're just using the word wrong as opposed to like
but they're
saying,
not.
well, I'm going to use it. Well, they are though, because democracy, as I said, democracy doesn't just mean everything is a direct election. That's
but
not
it
what I mean.
can.
Oh,
And principally,
it could,
most
sure.
people, I mean, Adam
Democracy is
literally
a broad
defined it that
label.
way.
No, but democracy is a very broad label.
Yeah, and they're
True.
specifically saying America is not a democracy. They say that, and that is the claim that is just, I mean, it's laughable.
So I wouldn't go as far to say America is not a democracy. I go with America is a republic. It's not a direct democracy, obviously, but I would say
Sure.
that's why they're trying to say it's a republic, though, because the point is, the reason I don't think it's a Sitch's law is the Democrats are arguing correctly that these things do not result in the majority winning. That's the principle they're arguing, and they're correct. And that's the point.
They would only be correct if they're saying America's not a direct democracy, but no one makes that argument because everyone agrees it's not a direct democracy.
They're making the argument that the things that America represents should represent the majority.
I get that.
That's what they're saying.
No, I get that, but that's usually the way it is.
It is usually how it is, but these systems have been specifically designed to not allow that, and they're saying that principle is why we need to change them.
I think that's I think you're giving a far more intelligent argument than they can.
Well,
I don't think that's.
I mean, okay, fair enough. That might not, but that's how I interpret the argument. Specifically, like the Supreme Court was when it really hit me, because when Roe v. Wade got overturned, I kept hearing the same argument over and over and over again. That like Roe v. Wade is the will of the people, 70% agreement, all this other stuff. That's why the Supreme Court is like illegitimate. And I'm like, the Supreme Court is not an entity of the will of the people.
Right.
It's not supposed to be an entity.
Well, it sort of is and isn't, because obviously you vote for the president who appoints it, and you vote for your senators that select them, or I guess let them go,
I mean,
right?
No, totally. To be fair, there's nothing in the American government doesn't have democracy in it.
Yes.
Right. Somewhere along the way.
Right.
But what they're basically, when they try to say, well, we need to pack the Supreme Court because it's not representing the country.
Sure.
And they're using an argument that says the majority thinks this should be the case. And principally, that's not the case with the Supreme Court. It's not supposed to be the case of the Supreme Court.
Well, but to me, it is kind of like, it's not a Sitch's law, but I guess it is a Sitch's law. It is that, and it is just like a word argument, because my response to them would be like, well, no, you're arguing that the Supreme Court is not an arm of direct democracy, which we'll agree. It's an arm of a representative democracy, because we all know how they get appointed. And if you're arguing in favor of abortion rights and you think that that's what the majority want, then just elect people through your electoral process. Then you'll be the majority and you can get this shit passed through normal legislation. Because it was never put in place in the first place by legislation. It was put in the first place by the Supreme Court too.
Isn't the Supreme Court majority rule? I mean, how do they decide these cases?
It is majority rule. Right. And that's what I mean. There's always democracy.
It's like a fucking democracy.
It is. That's the.
We're talking about the appointment of the justices is not a direct democracy.
Sure, of course not. But how the institution runs is literally a democracy.
Sure.
But
yes.
Anyway.
Well, same thing with getting rid of the filibuster or the Senate in general. The Senate is very not democratic in a lot of ways. Like votes aren't proportionate. Different senators kind of technically represent different amounts of people.
Right.
So all these things to me are they're not of the principle that the majority should win. And I when they say democracy, I think that's what they're saying. That's the principle that matters. So,
but I think they're just using the word democracy wrong. I don't know. I
don't think you could say it's wrong, because that is a form of democracy, and it goes to what you said. Democracy is far too generic.
Democracy is a broad term.
Yes, exactly. And and people don't like it because the right in particular is saying, well, that's why we're going to say something more specific. We're a republic. Right, that's more specific. We can be a democracy and a republic. But saying we're a republic is kind of putting rules on that doesn't allow for that insertion of, well, the majority.
Well, then people should, if people want to make the argument, they said we're not. I think what they should say, if they want to be actually accurate, say we're not a direct democracy or pure democracy. We're a constitutional republic, which is a form of democracy or a subset of democracies. But that's the problem. They say, well, we're not a democracy, we're a republic. That's because when we have these like talking points, they always get dumbed down to like a very low resolution, filter when, the broad public starts making the arguments.
Yes. It's very easy to say that because people kind of intuit and understand, and it's a simpler argument. But yeah, that's why it's said that way. So yes, technically it should be, we're not a direct democracy, we're a constitutional republic or a democratically elected, representative constitutional republic. But that's not as catchy as we're not a democracy.
But so that means that we're right, and it's a stupid argument.
Well, then if that's the case, then it's not the people making that argument. It's the people making the argument that we should get rid of the Electoral College for democracy.
All sides of the argument are stupid.
Okay.
The people making the argument and then the retort to the argument, I say, they're both stupid arguments.
I mean, okay, if fair enough, I think there's enough of a distinction because I do think the principles are there, right? Like I do think principally, it is like a Democrat point that matters, right, that this gets passed. But yeah, the argument could be done.
No, I agree. Like there is some conceptual argument there, but it's getting lost in the language that people are using to have the conversation. Because like I would wager, now maybe I'm wrong here, maybe I'm being cynical, but I'd wager that if you polled, the majority of people at some random fucking rally that said we're not a democracy, we're a republic, and you said, well, what does that mean? What's the difference? That they wouldn't be able to actually give you
I agree.
like a verbal definition of these two things in any way that made sense.
I mean, that's probably fair. Maybe that is cynical. I mean, like I don't know. I'm not gonna argue what the majority thinks. That's a little too much. I'm not gonna take on that burden. But I don't know. I mean, I think, but when we're talking about maybe Ben Shapiro or pundits, I think they're articulating that even if it isn't maybe down to the majority in a lot of ways. Like, the kind of, that's the way it works with a lot of things. The people on top kind of know, and the
it gets dumbed down.
Further down get dumbed down, but the principles are still there. So the thing is, I don't know how you get rid of this. Like, if it's a dumb argument, I don't know how you really get rid of it, because you do need a way to say we are not a democracy, and that is the point. As in, the majority rule is the point. And like even Adam earlier was kind of defining majority rule. He was saying the majority gets their way. And it's
How
like,
dare you, Adam?
No. And once again, specifically intentionally designed for that to not be true.
Where the minority gets their way, that's an aristocracy, by the way. So that's why.
Well, I mean, in 2016, the majority get their way.
I have one question. So the Electoral College, I'm under the impression it was invented so that the elites could override the will of the people. It was kind of like this switch that elites would have their hand on in case the public did something that they didn't like.
That is why it existed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So and slowly the power of the Electoral College has been taken away. Like the elites' hands have been taken off that switch slowly over time. Isn't the last step really what Sitch is talking about, like direct apportionment with popular vote?
I mean, I don't know if I necessarily agree that that's it's hard. Like the Electoral College was done for the elites. I don't know if that's really.
Well, what was the purpose of writing into the Constitution if that's not it? What is the purpose?
Well, I guess the problem that I'd say is first is that when the country was founded and most of the stuff was in place, it was only the elites voting anyway. So it's kind of like, it's kind of hard to say what their intentions were because they didn't have like universal voting for the most part.
Well, I mean, elites in the sense that male property owners were the only ones allowed to vote,
or whoever, right?
So,
whatever
but
the grouping was at any time.
It was the opportunity of the electors, the government electors, to override the will of the landed people, the landed people who were voting, the landed males.
So I'm not sure. How do you connect that? Like, why do you think that?
Well, you're making the argument that only elites could vote, but I mean, obviously there are levels to this, right?
Correct. Yes.
Yes. Someone who owns property is elite over a slave that he owns, right?
Sure.
Obviously, yeah. Over his
wife.
But the elector, the government elector, the person who goes to Washington and actually casts a vote is above the person who votes. Like there's, in a certain area, there's, thousands of property owners that vote in a state. And then there's like tens of electors who can override the will of those thousands of people.
Well, so that's the key. I mean, I don't necessarily think that they can. I mean, they can in a way.
Well, they originally could, but they made it illegal for them to override the will of the people.
Right. I don't think it was ever the intention for them to override the will of the people. Like there was.
Then why put it in there?
Because as far as I know, the reasoning was if something were to happen, you wouldn't have to go back to voting. So like the candidate who won like died or something, and then they could change their vote to
that's interesting.
The vice president or something. Like that's what I always thought the kind of Electoral College was part of the reason you had this like electors thing was for that reason that if there was like huge scandal like he's revealed to be a traitor like or something like that.
That's interesting. Because okay.
Back in the day, it would take months or even years for news like that to reach people. So that I didn't think they designed it to be that kind of overriding just because they felt like it or were against the minority or the the non-elite, whoever. I didn't think that was really the purpose. And then the other purpose was to structure it in a way where smaller states have a little bit more power.
So
Right.
okay. So I'm kind of reading this article about the Electoral College. So I guess it's important for us to remember the Electoral College came out of all the people that were in Congress, or I guess signing the Constitutional Convention, all arguing because no one could really come to like an agreement. So the Electoral College is a compromise. So the purpose is multifaceted as to why it exists. And so I think part of the purpose is what you're saying, Ashley, was just because obviously back in those days, information was slower. Part of it seems to be kind of what you were saying too, Adam, which is that there was a fear because at the time that America was kind of coming to being, according to this article, saying there was no government, no country that had a direct election for its executive branches
Yeah, they
or
were
for its executive
scared.
officer, and that there was a fear of like this would lead to some kind of weird mob rule in the country, and so they wanted a buffer in that and this was supposed to be like a buffer essentially to
Right.
prevent that from occurring. And
Which
then
makes
also there
sense.
was a third reason, which I don't fully understand the logistics of, but apparently had ties in heavily to the Three-Fifth Compromise and the, kind of protecting the institution of slavery. So, or the slave states, I guess.
Wow.
Slave states
Interesting.
might have been less densely populated.
They were, that's just why they
So,
had the Three-Fifths Compromise in the first place.
yeah,
But,
so if that's the case, then they would get more electoral votes
right.
than northern
So,
states. So,
right. So it's kind of interesting when people talk about, I guess, in the current conversation, like, so that's why I was saying I think it is valid for people to say we should retain the Electoral College to prevent, I guess, quote, the mob running over everyone. But people are making like that argument is a different argument than what was being levied at the time of its creation. So,
yeah, it's interesting.
anyways,
Okay. Yeah.
okay.
Okay. Fair enough.
Okay, so what don't we understand about conservatives? What are we
So
getting wrong?
the biggest thing that I continuously find myself saying is
Right.
I feel like you don't understand the importance to, I won't say necessarily conservatives, but right wingers, because I don't know, those words kind of get thrown around a little interchangeably.
Mm-hmm.
They probably shouldn't be, but they do. Is this differentiation between culture power, local power, state power, federal power? And a lot of times when I hear right wingers say things like Ben Shapiro, I know what he means, but you guys go authoritarian with it. And I know, because in this case, I listened to Ben Shapiro particularly quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
I know he doesn't mean it that way. Now, I don't really listen to Matt Walsh. I don't really like Matt Walsh.
Right.
But a lot of right wingers, they kind of, there's almost this thing when like you're mentioning this Destiny clip, which I've seen but forgotten about, where he says like, would you ban porn? He says yes. As like when a right winger, as a right winger, when I hear that, I'm immediately intuiting that as if you weren't right wing, what would you do? Because
What
the
do you
answer
what do you
is,
mean by that? I don't understand what
because
you
the
mean by
answer
that.
is, if I was right wing, the answer is the federal government doesn't have the authority to ban it. Right. But
Yeah,
that's
but
kind of a
that's yeah, but
cheap
you're
cop out.
yeah, but but again, I think this is you're kind of defining right wing as libertarian, which that's not. I don't think that's accurate.
Well, if I think the right is more libertarian than the left right now in this
I
country.
agree. I agree with that.
So,
Sure. I'm just saying
so
definitionally, it's not libertarian.
what I'd say it's not libertarian, but it is more libertarian-ish, right?
Yes.
So
Sure.
and
Sure.
I think the right leans that way in the sense that they don't want the federal government doing it. But when you ask a question like, if you were dictator for a day, what would you do? You're kind of saying, well, you can't say I wouldn't be a dictator. That's like a cheap kind of dodge of the real question. So I feel like a lot of times when the right says, like Ben Shapiro says that thing, he's kind of intuiting, okay, like I'm not a right winger. I'm not the right winger that I am that kind of wants small government, not federal government. What would I do? Or they're saying it from a moral perspective. And I think Matt Walsh, for the sake of this discussion, I'll say Matt Walsh might mean it a lot like that too. I don't know Matt Walsh well enough to say this for sure. But when he says something like, I think porn should be banned, there is an idea there that says, well, I'm not talking about the practicality of giving the government the authority to do it. I'm just talking about the principle of doing it.
Well, okay. So someone asked me, I said, okay, since you're dictator for a day, would you do X, Y, Z? I mean, my response would be like, No, because I believe even as a dictator, I still want to live in like a country where like I protect individual freedoms and things of that nature.
So I guess when I hear that, what I hear is I don't want your opinion on individual freedoms because I already know that.
Yeah, but I
I
think
want your
you're
opinion on whatever I'm
reading.
asking for.
I get that, but I think you're reading like way too much into the question, your own interpretation. Because if Lex Friedman just asked Ben Shapiro, like, should porn be banned? And Destiny says no, and then Ben says, if you could do it, yes. Like, I don't know. I don't think you should be reading in the sort of like this level of explanation that you're reading into it. There's no indication that's what Ben means.
Well,
You're giving just some level of charity by saying he's saying it would be better for society, not necessarily that he would ban it.
right. So, well, even in that statement, yes, if it could, and I think a lot of what that means is the right thinks it can't. The right is not the party of federal authority working. They don't think that stuff works.
Yeah, but
So, like, so he would
that's
do
only
it if it could work.
okay. But again, I mean, okay. Well, hold on. Do you, when Ben was kind of explaining the difference between conservatives and libertarians, you agree with that conception, right? Or do you not agree with that conception?
I do agree with it. Yes, to
Okay.
at least to an extent. I think that there's kind of like maybe a spectrum there, right? Yeah, how libertarian to how conservative you are.
Well, obviously, yeah, I agree. It's a spectrum. Right? It's a spectrum. We
Yeah,
have our
well,
rainbow
and
spectrum of
and
conservative to libertarian. Yeah.
there's another kind of thing of, and I think this would be conservatives is once again the kind of local versus federal. That would matter too, because I
Sure.
think a lot of libertarians would be against it even happening on a local level, whereas a
Yeah.
lot of
Right.
conservatives might give that authority on a local level, but wouldn't on a federal level.
Yeah, but see, okay, well, I want to come back to the local versus federal thing. But before we do, because I think there's an interesting concept there. Before we come back to that, like, and this is why I guess I have a problem with the way you're framing right wing, because I think you're using the term too broadly. Because yes, libertarians should, on a principled perspective, say, I don't think porn should be illegal or banned, even if I think it's morally destructive to people. But someone who isn't a libertarian but is socially conservative should not have a problem saying, I think porn should be banned by the government.
Say that one more time.
If a person is libertarian, they should have a position where they say, I don't think porn should be banned by the government, even if I think it's destructive to people on a moral level, right?
Sure.
That should be the libertarian position.
Yes. Yeah.
If you're a social conservative who's not libertarian, your position should be the opposite. You should say, I think the government should ban pornography because it is morally reprehensible.
That's where I would say that's I don't know if you could say that that's true, because I view as like, if you're talking social conservatism as a general principle, yes. If you're
That is what I'm
talking
saying.
American social conservatism, I would say the answer is a lot grayer.
Well, obviously, as you know, you said, there's going, like, if we can imagine a spectrum on the right of like libertarian to social conservative, and then even it's not going to be clear because on different issues people are going to come up in different positions, right? But so I guess when we're having a conversation, I'm just saying if someone is more on the side of social conservative and not really libertarian, that they should be more in the position of outlawing banning pornography, which seemed to be Matt Walsh's take. He says ultimately he wants it to be illegal. He just doesn't think it's like logistically possible.
So, well, this is kind of like the left-right debate, where I if you're not giving a context of a country, I don't think social conservatism has a lot of meaning, right? And that's when I say left, right, or social conservatism or the left, I mean the left in America right now, right? Because I don't think you can really, like, you know, kind of like we were talking with Dev the other day, I don't think you can say a left, a right, or social conservative or not, because especially if conservatives are preserving tradition, then social conservatism changes in every country because they're going to have different traditions and different values,
Right, but
and different systems. So when I say social
sure.
conservatism, I'm talking America, and in America there is a brand of like libertarianism in the right and in social conservatism, because we're probably one of the most libertarian countries, I guess you could almost like philosophically, out there. So this is kind of where the thing, when Matt Walsh says he would ban it, part of me, I don't know if he's overriding that, because that would mean giving the federal government the authority to do it, and most social conservatives say the federal government is retarded and can't do anything. So they would never give the authority to the federal government to do that.
Right, but so the problem could be, because I agree with you that like the tradition in America is more libertarian, which is unusual. And so it kind of puts us in this weird spot where we say, okay, if someone is conservative and they're advocating for something libertarian, is it because either A, they're just advocating for the libertarian principle because they're more in favor of, or their intuition, I guess, aligns more with tradition and is anti trying new things or changing new things. So they say, okay, well, the tradition has been libertarian, so that's the safer road. That could be the reason. It could be that they have a more libertarian moral intuition where they say, fuck you, I literally just don't like the government or an external force telling me what I can and can't do, which would be a completely different reason. Or then an even third completely different reason, which is that I don't trust the federal government because either I think they're competent or because I think the power will be used against me or because I just think that the federal government generally more often or not aligns with the left. So that's why I'm more libertarian. So there can be multiple reasons for why people, I guess, are
Yes.
libertarian in America. And that's why when I kind of talk about the left and right, I'm trying to get to a more, like, I understand what you're saying, but I'm trying to get to a more universal definition of like what makes someone on the left, what makes someone on the right, what are the moral intuitions that are necessarily guiding people. Because I would say that the conservative in my mind, the person who's guided by the moral intuitions of conservatism is the Matt Walsh person who says, I think pornography is bad for people's soul, it's degenerate, it's disgusting, we should not allow it, and that anything else, and I don't want the government to allow it. And then anything else about this kind of, well, the government shouldn't do it, blah, blah, blah. That's what I would say is a more libertarian moral intuition and is not a conservative moral intuition, even if they align in America.
So yeah, generally speaking, yes, I guess I would agree with that statement. But then when it comes to someone like Matt Walsh, who is an American, I think the local kind of has to override. So if you're saying generally are social conservatives that way, I'd say yeah, probably, right? Especially on a global scale, like
Well, I guess
very traditionalist religions.
the reason I think it's difficult to kind of have the local conceptions because as I was saying, like there's multiple reasons for why someone could be libertarian, and they usually don't explicitly spell it out. They can sometimes, but they usually don't explicitly spell it out. It's the same thing, kind of going back to what you're saying, like the difference between local and federal government, which I acknowledge that we don't generally talk about that because I don't find it to be as interesting just personally, because I think it kind of gets in the same problem where I understand there's like a philosophical, ideological argument that could be a good argument about why it makes sense that you want to give the local government more power or stricter power over the federal government, which should have more like general, vague, or broad powers, and then the local has more specialized. And I understand like the ideological argument there, and I think I even agree with it. But I wonder if a lot of the people who kind of harp on that and focus on that, they're doing it not because they agree with that ideological distinction, they're just doing it because they view the federal government as being more left leaning and they want their policies to be more right leaning. So they want the local government to have more power for that reason.
I mean, I like. I kind of
I
hate
guess
when you use
just to
that
say
argument.
simple, I guess just to say simply, like I think that most people are making their arguments, their political arguments, not based on ideological considerations, but on like the pragmatic consideration of like how the power is materializing at the moment.
So I mean, obviously, I think that's a factor, but the problem with that is that it allows you to basically just kind of say that the right is responsible for doing something that they're not actually doing, right?
What do you mean?
Because you're saying, well, the right has these opinions because the left has control of the power of the government, right? And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
but the right would totally do it if they had the power,
Right.
and it's like,
Right.
yeah, but the right isn't doing that right now. So
Well,
you
they don't
can't
have the
just,
power.
but you can't just declare that because then basically you're pretty much just saying that the right does whatever the left does, and it's like,
No,
well,
but I make the same
no, they
argument for
haven't
the
done it yet.
left, though. Like the left,
But
the left
the
only
left is
makes the
doing
argument.
it.
No, no, no. But I'm saying like the only reason the left is not giving a shit about free speech is because when they used to is because they have the power. Like both sides are just making arguments based on the power they have. If the left, like if we lived in a country where the federal government was far more socially conservative and local governments were far more liberal, everyone would just have like the opposite opinion on this conversation. I don't think most people's opinion on it is rooted in ideological consideration. And so I find that people that make the argument based on the ideology, I'm like, okay, you can have that opinion. I just don't think that's like real. I don't think that's where most people's real opinion comes from.
I mean, I don't disagree in concept, but I just think that's just not a way to basically to argue or to think about it because, as I said, you're basically equating people doing things and people not doing things as both doing them, and that's a very nice argumentation when the left has power because the right isn't doing any of it, but you're saying, but we can still act like they would.
Well,
And
I
it's like,
guess
well, that's real nice if you're on the left.
sure. I understand what you're saying. I guess my thought process for why is because I want people to make arguments based on what's actually motivating them. And I feel like a lot of these arguments about like power and how it should be structured are all backwards motivated. They're all motivated by who has the power. They're not like someone. It's like nice that someone's making an ideological argument, but I just don't believe that they actually agree with that ideology.
So
And
as I said,
so
I mean,
I want them to make their actual argument, like the real argument.
that's probably true. There's probably a lot of truth to people seeking power, et cetera, et cetera. But if you can't mind read that, if the right is saying we don't want to do this, you can't just go, well, that's just because you don't have power. Therefore, you would actually do exactly what the left is doing. I think that's just like you have to listen to them.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they take power and they do it, then and do the crazy dumb shit, whatever the hell the right would do when they get all this power,
Mm-hmm.
then you could be like, see, yeah, that's what happened. And then I'll have to switch sides essentially and be like, oh, okay, yeah, they were. But I don't think it's helpful to basically say that the right would just do what the left is doing if they had the power and it's all about the power, because at the moment the left has the power. So you're essentially smearing every right winger with stuff they're not actually doing. And you're just going, well, I think you would. And it's like, well, I'm saying I won't. Well, I think you would.
Well, I'm basing it. I understand what you're saying. Right. I understand what you're saying, but I'm basing it off of the fact that, I mean, we don't live in a vacuum. We lived in a society where the right was doing that for decades. And it's
Yeah,
like there's like a recent cultural switch. And I don't think everyone on the right has suddenly had some kind of massive epiphany and changed their entire stance.
And Ben Shapiro said that about the left. So what's the difference? Like he said the left would ban churches.
I think that's okay. I don't.
The difference is
That's
one's true and one isn't true.
No. Well, I don't think that the left is the one in the power, so the left is the one doing things. The whole argument is the right doesn't have power, but they would do things. So the left
but I guess
churches has the power, so that would fit into that framing, right?
I guess it depends. And I understand what you're saying that like, yeah, maybe we should try not to mind read, but I guess I'm trying to make the argument in terms of like, this is why I think it's important that we should all actually be operating from a principled position of like, this is why free speech is important. This is why maintaining individual liberty is important. This is why we should, putting restrictions on government control that we sort of all, or societal control, both government and societal control that we agree with, is to try to avoid the flip-flopping of our positions as soon as our party essentially gets power. Right. That's why I'm making the argument. I'm not trying to make the argument to just say like fuck right wingers. I'm basically saying fuck everybody. That's why we need to have a principled stance.
But that's exactly my point. You're saying fuck everybody, but the left is actually doing it.
Well,
the right isn't.
There are people on both sides that will do it, though. I mean,
just because you're
just because you won't doesn't mean someone won't.
What I don't like is conceptually the right is saying the things like such that you're saying. And they're saying it, and you're immediately going kind of, well, you don't actually mean that. And it's like, well, if they're saying it, and you're just going to say when they say it, well, I don't believe it because of this power. Then,
well, what's an example? I can't. I'm trying to think of one to like ground my mind.
Of what, like what specifically? Just kind of
like something
free speech right now. Like I mean, that was kind of the thing that you use. The right is generally on the side of free speech and don't ban people off platforms and blah blah blah. Right, and they're saying that. But then you're kind of just saying, well, yeah, you're saying that, but you don't actually mean that. You're just saying that because you don't have power. So it's like, well, if that's the argument in the formula, then no one can ever mean that.
Well, no,
right? Because
well, you can mean it if you show that even when it goes against something that you wouldn't want, you're still in the position of advocating for free speech. And I think this came to head a lot with that I forget what state it was, the state that had the Satan statue inside. God. And literally so many people in the right's minds fucking melted.
So I have a different opinion on that than I think you do. So like, I don't want the statue taken down. I don't really give a shit, but I do understand like why I think they're doing that. And that's why I kind of think it's sort of fair. Why that happened that way. And I mean, I can go into it if you want, but like, whatever.
Well,
like
I understand it's a whole different. I know it's a whole different topic, but I guess I see it as the same. I definitely think that you can make argument like when you have in red states where there are, hey, we're trying to essentially say that there can't be, there are restrictions on freedom of speech in terms of, what kind of reading material can be allowed in school libraries, what kind of, whether they can have the drag shows be open to the public, and, whether you can have various pride parade sorts of things. And I agree that those should be restricted, but I mean, those are not free speech absolutist positions to hold.
Well, no one's really the free speech absolutist. You say that. I agree.
I know that.
But like,
but
I
people
guess,
say they are, even though they're not, because it becomes a low resolution, dumbed down argument. So.
That's true. That's true. But like, I with the statute thing, I don't think that was actually a free speech issue. With a lot of the pride stuff, it gets a little murky because they're public. A lot of cases, they're public events, and that means you are infringing on other people,
right?
In a way, anyway. And that gets, once again, that also gets kind of murky. So, those you kind of have to go into those specifically, but the left generally has a concept right now that is just far more generic of, speech that is bad should not exist.
That's true. Yeah,
or should,
that's
like,
true.
so it's, these specific ones, as I said, with the statue, I don't even think that was free speech, to be perfectly honest. Like that, that's kind of I think that was kind of like the left retaliating, but I don't think it was a free speech thing at all.
I think this is what is guiding my intuition here and my thought process, and why I frame these things the way that I frame them, which is that I do think the pendulum effect is real. And I'm trying in my own mind and for the audience to try to limit the pendulum, because I think that our society does the best being more towards like the moderate middle. And so I'm trying to limit the pendulum, because I think what basically happens, what I notice in a lot of other YouTubers in their communities, is that like, it's true. They'll say like, okay, look, the left has become the side of anti-free speech at the moment. The right's become the side of the more pro-free speech. And they kind of just have this like very blunt, right's free speech, right's free speech. We're like, go right. Right is good. Right is good. Left is bad. Left is bad. And it's kind of like the mantra that exists. And then to me, I see those communities just become more and more like far right, or it becomes easier for them to kind of fall into the pitfalls of like, oh, well, I'm now like a monarchist, or I'm now, a dissident writer, or I'm now like in favor of the Civil War. I'm not like, it seems like when you have these kind of like blunt approaches that just like my side good, other side bad, that just, it draws people to extremism, and it's going to make the pendulum swing further in that direction. And I think that's why I'm kind of like intuiting why like I frame these things the way that like, everyone sucks, because I'm trying to keep everyone towards like the middle.
Sure. No, I as I said, I understand the intuition, but as somebody on the right, it doesn't ring, because it rings like you're making an excuse for the left.
Yeah, but it should. I mean, I understand that you're saying, but that to me, it shouldn't, because I'm literally saying the left sucks, but so does the right. I mean, I'm not making an excuse for anyone. I'm saying both sides are just basing their things on power, that there's not like a quote good, just side. There's a side that aligns with your moral intuitions more so than the other side.
So the thing is, though, is as I said, what I go back to is one side's actually doing it. And when you're doing that, you're universalizing it. And it's like, well, that's when you're doing something wrong, it's really good if everybody's doing it.
Aren't you also making the argument, though, that the right wouldn't do it? Seems like that's the argument that you made. Look, we know
I have to go
someone on the right would do it.
Obviously, somebody on the right would do it.
Yeah, okay. So you accept both sides are bad.
So I don't think it's that like crazily like a guess.
I mean, the thing I'm just simply saying is that when you have a right who has principles and they're espousing them, and you kind of go, well, I know you have those, but you're just like the left. Once again, it's very convenient for the person doing something wrong to say everybody does this.
Right. I understand.
So that just doesn't work at all with me. It's like, to me, you have to take them on the word until they start doing other things, and then call them out when they do the other things. What you don't get to do is say, well, the left doing all this stuff, the right would totally do all that stuff too. So therefore, they're kind of all the same.
How do you say somebody? I mean, he's right to a certain extent. Such you have to nail it down to, okay, there are bad actors on the right that would engage, would act against their principles, or bad actors on the left that would act against their principles, and we just have to take that into consideration. I mean, that's really what we're saying, right?
Well, I think it's fair to say, like, when judging individual people's behavior, we should try to not jump to these conclusions unless they present evidence for it the way that I think. I mean, I think Matt Walsh has presented evidence for it, but I shouldn't just automatically assume every single person as an individual, and talk about individual, would just throw away their principles that they espouse as soon as they have power. That's not fair on an individual level. I think I can still make that argument on a broad level because history has shown us that to be true. And it seems like we all intuitively agree with that. And that's why we're all in favor of like living in a country where we protect the individual rights of citizens from the government because we don't trust the government for that reason. We don't trust other people with power for that very reason.
Sure. Yeah, and I get what you're trying to say. Like ultimately, I do agree that like yeah, a lot of the right would end up doing that.
Well, now you're upping the ante to a lot of the right.
Well,
you're kind of making our argument now.
Statistically significant people because that is the way power works. But I just my opinion is you have to let them do that first, right? Even if you think, oh, most of them will, like you kind of have to. It's like you can't say that the next generation like that. That's like saying, well, the Democrats will go back to being the party of the KKK or something because they were before. It's like, well, if they don't, then they don't. And if they do, then they do. So I can say in like a kind of philosophical way that like, yeah, most people are motivated by power. If there's a anti-free speech like thing that will help them win elections, there's a good chance they will do it. But I just think you have to let them go that far. And when they're telling you, we don't like that right now, then you just kind of have to go, okay, that's the side that doesn't like this.
It seems like part of your objection is that the statement tarnishes the brand of the right.
No, it does. Yes.
Okay.
Well, I actually view it more as like covering for the left than tarnishing the right.
But we're not covering for the left. Obviously, look, most of our channel is devoted to calling out the left's insanity. Like how
do not make me do what I did the other day. The shell game that you guys play with the left. You guys don't criticize the left. You very rarely criticize the left. You criticize leftists.
Okay.
And that like that's really important because I kind of view you guys as being tribally on the left.
We're criticizing rightists, and you're saying that tarnishes the brand of the entire right. Now, when we criticize leftists, that doesn't tarnish the brand of the entire left?
So this would be a big distinction. You are not criticizing rightists. You guys criticize Trump. Trump is the Republican nominee. He is the right. If he is not a fringe of the right. He is the right.
But you literally just said that many people on the right would do the kinds of things like, ban pornography outright. They would do authoritarian things. You just made that argument. You said most. You said many people or most.
Many, I don't know if it'd be most, but as I said, I can't really say.
And that statement tarnishes the brand of the right.
Yes.
Correct?
Well, yes.
Okay. Look, we're saying many people on the left would do authoritarian stuff that tarnishes the brand of the left.
But the difference is that the left is actually doing it. Like right now with policy. And the point I'm making is that's why I say I don't really view you as hitting the right so much as kind of covering the left. As I said, universalizing something, for lack of a better term, your team is doing is covering for them. Because you're basically saying it's not my team. It's just a thing people do.
I understand what you're saying. And I the thing that relates to the shell game thing that you also said, which is that, and I guess what I would say in response to that is, and you're saying like the left is doing this, and it's like, okay, I guess I would feel more comfortable to sort of to kind of frame things the way that you are if I felt the right broadly in America would acknowledge this sort of crazy shit that Trump did do. Like if the right, as is said, as a broad consensus, it's unacceptable that Donald Trump tried to get Pence to overturn the entire fucking election in a like insanely undemocratic / constitutional republic way. Then I would be like,
way,
right, in a weird authoritarian way. Then I would agree, then I'd be a lot more on your side, obviously. But that's the problem is that I don't see that at all.
I mean,
and so I don't know if it's fair to say like, oh well, look, the right won't do anything. It's like the right's literally covering for Donald Trump doing that crazy shit right now.
So I mean, when you say the right, I mean Ben Shapiro doesn't. He's one of the largest. Basically, nobody at the Daily Wire does, as far as I know. Maybe Michael Knowles and Matt Walsh a little bit on there, but that's one of the largest right-wing outlets. I mean, Fox News lost a portion of its viewers and, because of the same thing. So I don't think it is as universal on the right that everyone's just covering for Trump doing crazy shit.
Yeah, that's a fair point. That is
I know, but they're still, first of all, I mean, I agree that I'm assuming Ben Shapiro has criticized Trump. I've heard him criticize Trump a lot more than I've heard other people on the right do it. But broadly the voting base of the right doesn't seem to give a shit about that, number one. And number two, I mean, I can't imagine why, like, to me, I can't vote for someone that attempted to do that. And I don't understand even how Ben Shapiro or anyone else, even if they disagree with it, would then turn around and vote for Donald Trump.
So there's a couple things that would come to mind. One is a lot of the right doesn't want to say, what Pence did, what Trump did and all this other stuff is crazy, which I think it was. But a lot of reason they don't want to say that is because the left is playing this game where they want to call it an insurrection. And they don't mean it like you guys. They mean it violent. They mean fascists.
I know.
So there's too much there for them to give that. So I think that's one of the bad reasons. That's not a great reason. It's not a good reason, actually, at all, to not call out Trump for that. As far as voting for Trump, this is something that I think I just disagree broadly with you guys. Is I see a lot of what Trump did, a lot of what these people do, and politicians in general, I view them as almost in the same way I would view, like, maybe kind of a layman expression, but like kind of like a lawyer, where they kind of do everything to get their client off, right? That's what they should do. They're there to defend their client, right? So I view institutions as the judge and the politicians as lawyers. So when they say things to try to do things, they say them with the idea that the institutions can fight back and do something. So I just feel like when Trump was doing a lot of this stuff, he's basically advocating for what his constituents want. Now, I don't really agree with it. I thought it was kind of stupid. But that is just something that I think has to happen.
It does too. I don't disagree with you. It has to happen to an extent, but also this, and like it's like a weird dichotomy, because at the same time, the politician and the president, they are the institution at the same time. And you have to not abuse their power and just say, well, I'm just hoping the checks and balances will, kick into effect and prevent me from abusing my power. I mean, I don't think that's like a good way to sort of concept, or how the president itself or any elected officials should conceptualize their position.
I mean, but that's like, just as an example, that's what Biden's doing with student loan forgiveness, right? He's kicking that against the Supreme Court. But that's the way it is. That's what people do. And
sure, but obviously that it exists on a spectrum, right? Because like obviously the harm to the country of Biden forgiving student loans would be significantly less than overturning the entire election.
Well, so that's obviously true. But I guess I just view it as these politicians are advocating for these things. So when it comes to like, would I vote for Trump after this? I view a lot of what Trump did as that. Now, I said, I don't like it. Personally, I thought it was, as I said, I thought it was just kind of dumb and it made him look petty and stupid. So I don't really like that he did it, particularly because it wasn't like very effective. It wasn't very good. And it was far more harmful than I think even I don't really agree that if Pence even had to overturn their votes, I still don't think Trump would have been president. Like, well, I think like it wouldn't have happened anyway. Still,
I think the issue is that the Republican pundit class, the Republican political class, is terrified of is basically audience captured. Because I mean, this is why I said, like, I'd be far more on board. Like, if DeSantis was the nominee, I probably would vote for him for president if he was the nominee. And this is like my problem is that, like, I understand what you're saying about Trump, but I feel like if all the Republican political class, pundit class, and everything, if they all were not audience captured and they just said what Donald Trump did on January 6th by trying to get Pence to overturn the votes was like un-American and super fucked up, and we can't support someone like this. This goes against the entire point of Republicans supposed to being like in favor of the Constitution, blah, 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 and then really pushed that message and wasn't afraid of their audience, then I don't think he would have won the nomination. But that's not what happened. They kind of wishy-washy went to see where the wind swayed, essentially, and softballed, criticisms of Trump, and then he became the nomination again.
I should say. That's definitely true, and a lot of that is just the just the kind of shitty thing about politics. Trump is popular, right? So I don't really like that either. Like, I think there is a lot of criticism there.
Right, but
I would have preferred DeSantis personally, but like, there is this kind of thing of Trump just has a lot of authority in amongst it for other reasons than what happened on January 6th. Right?
Of course, but this is
that's what it's about.
Right, but this is why I have to go back to the original point. This is why my worldview is kind of set with like, well, I don't believe that, the Republican Party as a whole cares about the like principled position because I'm looking at Donald Trump basically violating a lot of those principled positions and not really getting penalized by the Republican Party for doing that. So it's an example in my mind of like why I hold the positions I hold.
Sure, and if you want to criticize Republicans and say they are compromising the principles there, that's fine. But I think when you stretch it out to the places they aren't compromising, that they totally will. Like I feel like it's like, well, as I said, then they can't really have any principles because then if they tell you this is what I think, and you kind of do this too with like abortion. I've noticed you have this idea that they would totally ban abortion, and then every time you get a right winger on, they're like, no, we wouldn't do that, and you're just like, well, I think you're a libertarian, right? You're more libertarian right wing, and it's like you kind of it's. I guess what I'm saying is it's easy to get into a trap of I can just say you would do this in the future because it's this kind of pragmatic thing, and
Yeah,
then
no,
as I said, hide that is covering for the left.
I
So
agree with you, and maybe I do it too far unfairly, but I think it's because I'm trying to distill the difference between the left, the right, and the libertarian. And I think the problem stems from what you were saying, which is that libertarian is like very heavily mixed into the right in America, and it
currently,
makes the conversation difficult because at least
right,
most conservatives that I've heard in my entire life still are in favor of banning abortion.
not
So
federally.
I'm not, yeah, not federally, but that's
Well, that's
only,
the difference.
well, but yeah, but why? What's the
Like,
argument for that?
why ban it? Why only ban it at the state level, or
Yeah,
why generally state versus federal is a difference?
either or.
So to me, it's because when you do things on a local level, you can have
Mm-hmm.
multiple majorities, right? Like the minute something's on a state, it's kind of like what Ben was saying with the whole gun analogy, right? At a federal level, you can only have one majority and one minority, right? Because it's the whole country.
Mm-hmm.
But like what we have now, you have majorities in Texas that banned abortion, which I didn't really particularly like, but whatever. I live in Texas. And then you can have a majority in California that doesn't want to. So
I
you
agree.
allow more
Yeah,
majorities
okay.
to win and
Right.
lose, right? That's
Okay.
one reason just on
Right,
face,
right, right,
right?
right. But hold on, let me. So I understand these arguments, and I think that there are issues that I can understand people making these arguments. I guess part of why I'm skeptical with abortion specifically is that if the argument is you're literally murdering a baby, it's hard for me to think that the people that believe that would then have their feelings on the murdering a baby be superseded by like this political federal versus state government, how the power should be, whether people like I want people to be able to vote whether they think they should murder the baby or not. Like I just don't really believe that that's where people's position is stemming from, in my
So
opinion.
like, I mean, I'm
You
kind
could
of in
say it's
that
unfair
vein.
of me, and I'm doing some mind reading, but my intuition is pointing me in that direction. So,
I I think the way I would phrase it is I understand that and I'm not a religious, this is why I probably wouldn't be classified as a conservative because I'm not particularly religious, and I think the
mhm,
conservatives have kind of gone that way now, where it's like,
sure.
if you really want to call yourself a conservative, you're gonna have to be kind of religious, which is kind of unfortunate. But when it comes to something like abortion, I do think there is ground to say I think it is murder, but I also acknowledge that that isn't something I can prove
Hmm.
philosophically. Like I can prove it to myself, right? But I don't have
Right,
some definitive truth. Now the religious people, they do generally because they, use God as that kind of truth, right? But
right.
so in that sense, you can say that, like, oh, I would say that it's murder, but I think it's okay for other states to
Right, but you
do other
acknowledge you're a
things.
unique you have a very unique position in this
I think
conversation.
I'm more common on the right than anything else. At least
Really,
polling seems
you don't
to
think the
show that.
majority of I would wager the majority of people on the right who are coming at the abortion or anti-abortion also are religious, and that affects their thinking.
I I guess kind of if you want to be a little more specific, as far as I know, polling on this in the Republican Party, about 20% of people are what would really constitute pro-life, like real pro-life, like keep the rape baby pro-life.
Sure, but that's not really what I'm saying. I'm just saying that most people would.
Well, I view them as the religious ones, the heavily religious ones. The other 80% that are like kind of iffy, I think there's some religious there, but I mean, I think you can do a lot of
Well, I don't
libertarian
see why that
kind of
would
thinking
be
there too.
the. I don't see why that would be the factor for judging like the religiousness of it. I mean, if you just looked up, I guess you just look up like, how many people in the Republican Party are atheist versus like identifying as religious.
I haven't looked that up in a long time, but I thought it was like 30 or 40%, or like very like Christian at least, which would probably be the majority anyway. But I guess I look at the Republican Party, particularly now, because a lot of the left has kind of, like the moderate left has kind of gotten chased over to the right with wokeness and all the other.
Yeah, that's definitely
nonsense.
happened to an extent.
I actually think the right is, I would say most of the right is not like heavily opposed to abortion. And as I said, I think in order to be like keep the rape baby or maybe an exception for rape, I very rarely have met anybody who holds those positions who isn't pretty religious.
Yeah,
I think that's
agree
incredibly
with that.
rare.
Sure,
so when I'm kind of using that as a proxy, that if it's like 20% of this super pro-life and like 80% I think or 75% are like some restriction-ish area, like that tells me that, not necessarily me specifically, but I think close to me is maybe if not the majority, close to it, like 30 to 40, 40 to 30 kind of a deal.
Okay, well, listen, I guess we'll find out, because I think it's very likely that Donald Trump wins, and it's very likely Republicans get a majority in both the House and Senate. So I guess we'll find out if they try to pass legislation on a federal abortion. If they don't, then I'll say, okay, you were right. Listen, the Republicans, they stuck to their guns, their principles. They said, we're not going to do it. No.
You might not be able to do that because like Ben Shapiro, and obviously he's super pro-abortion. He says they can't pass legislation.
He's super pro-abortion?
Or pro-life.
I know.
Sorry, pro-life. Yeah. Right. Sorry. He said that they can't do it.
What do you mean?
That they can't pass legislation to allow it. He would say the Supreme Court would be obligated to overturn anything that they do.
No, but even if they attempt to, that would still show them I was right, regardless of
sure. If they attempt to, right. I guess what I was trying to say is just because they don't doesn't mean you're not wrong. Doesn't mean you're wrong, right? Because I think a lot of them may practically look at this as like a political issue, and they go, "Well, it's just going to get overturned anyway." So they're like, "I'm not taking that political hit."
No, that's true. So, that's definitely true, right?
I don't think they're going to push that stuff for a lot of reasons. I think they like a lot of the Republicans do like it on the states right now. A lot of right-wing people, they kind of like it on the states, and I don't know if they're going to try to kick that hornet nest.
Right, but my intuition is that the reason that they like it on the states is because they've made that argument for so long that they can't, like, they don't want to appear inconsistent. People don't like to appear inconsistent.
Sure.
Am I doing mind reading by doing that? Sure, I am. But
sure.
I'll acknowledge that. It's just my intuition. I don't know.
No, I think that's right. I think that's right. I mean, as I said, so yeah. I mean, I agree, and I just think they're not going to touch it. They're going to ignore it as much as humanly possible.
I guess we'll see. It would be interesting to find out. So.
And Trump himself has kind of said the same thing. Too.
Well, I think he's looking at it from a very pragmatic perspective of, he knows it's like not a good issue to run on.
Oh yeah. No, I agree. So without him pushing it, I can't see the House or the Senate like trying to push it with Trump being like, don't do that. Because he pretty much, I think he slammed DeSantis for 6 weeks. I think is what DeSantis put in. And Trump, I think, was like, that's too strict.
Right.
So, I can't see it. And
yeah, well, I don't think
practicality, I agree. I don't think
philosophical position. Let me read some super chats. Blaine's escape quota for $10 says, even at the best policed, best schooled area, you're still responsible for your own stuff. I'm not taking away from the government. Just don't like people are only responsible for less than 100% of their life. Fair enough.
Are there super chats specifically for Ostercy? Because we should wrap up too. I got shit I got to do. So
I'm assuming the ones after that have to do with the conversation we're just having. So.
Okay, go ahead.
Edward Senior for $20, thank you, says, quote, the "we're not a democracy" argument from a populist would be founded on the gatekeeping of candidates by major parties and donors. If no candidates are in congruence with your politics, is that really a democracy? I'm going to have to read that again. The "we're not a democracy" argument from a populist would be founded on the gatekeeping of candidates by the... I understand.
Sounds kind of elite theory-ish,
Yeah. They're basically saying the populace okay, I mean, I guess they could make that argument, but then those people wouldn't turn around and say that we're a republic, I imagine. They're making just a completely different argument than the whole, like, we're not a democracy, we're a republic. they're saying we're not democracy, we're an oligarchy controlled by like the deep state and the elites. So, Brian for $20. Thank you. Says Sitch, your argument that the right sees the federal government as left wing is wrong. The Republican Party had power under Bush in all branches of government, and there's no social conservative agenda pushed through the federal government. Well, first of all, didn't Bush try to get a federal ban on gay marriage? Or am I misremembering that?
I wouldn't even call that conservative at the time, though. That's kind of a
I mean,
time that was kind of that in 2004. I mean, wasn't Barack Obama against gay marriage when he first got in? And like, I mean, that's a long. That was a long time ago. That was a much more
but it was
normalized position.
Well, you didn't see I guess Bill Clinton did the don't ask, don't tell policy, but that was supposed to be like the like throwing a bone to the gays there versus the federal. I don't think do you think a Democrat, if Al Gore won, do you think Al Gore would have pushed for a federal ban on gay marriage?
No.
Well, so then it's like the Republican position, right?
Well, no, I think it was more the majority position at that point.
It might be, but it was, if you don't think the Democrats would enact that policy and you think the Republicans would, then it's the Republican position definitionally, even if it's the majority opinion.
Well, I guess I would say it's more like that was the moderate position. Like that was the position back then. You know what I mean? Like that's like, I feel like at that point in time, if I don't know, maybe I mean that was a long time ago, but I feel like at that point, if you polled, it would be like 60 or 70% would be maybe not for a ban, but not for it. If that makes sense. I think that would probably be the feel there. So meaning saying I'm not the 30% of extreme Democrats, therefore it's a right-wing position is kind of like, I feel like that's a little.
Like, well, I don't know. I have to go back because beyond the gay marriage ban attempt, which I don't believe passed, it's been a while, so I don't remember exactly all the policies that Bush was in favor of. I kind of vaguely remember. I thought they also wanted to pass the flag burning amendment, but I don't remember what happened to that. But I mean, it could be. You could be right, Brian. I'd have to think about it more. I don't know. It seems to me that whenever I hear people on the right talk about it, it just the intuition, the sense that I get is that there's this: the federal government is not enacting conservative policies. And these are the arguments that I've been hearing from people on the right. Maybe I've been too poisoned by listening to the dissident right crowd, the Mencius Molebugs, and it's like poisoned my thinking because that's sort of the arguments that they're making, and I should be separating that from like the normal conservative who doesn't believe in that dumb shit. So, Brian for $10 says the conservative philosophy of limited federal government held true under Bush. Then, can you explain why? Well, I don't know if it did though. Again, people always talk about Bush, ballooning the budget and doing all that shit. So,
which Bush?
George W.
The
Bush.
guy who invaded the Middle East.
Was that? Yeah, but I guess that's not like a social policy, right?
That's limited government, though. I mean, huge government spending for wars in Iraq and Afghanistan.
There's some ground there, like the kind of federal government budget thing. Like I know that's kind of a right wing thing, but I think it's a kind of a bad proxy for what right wingers actually think. They say that, a lot of them, but I don't view like what Bush did as expanding that much, because I think, at least me, when I talk about expansion of the government, I'm talking mostly about scope. So for most conservatives, I would say conservatives and right wingers, national defense is within the scope of the federal government. So if you balloon the budget to pay for a war, that's not expanding the government in that sense. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. Well, what are some of the things on this scope metric aside from going to war?
Well, so it's taking on things that wouldn't be the responsibility of the federal government. So like if the government did healthcare now, like they did the NHS, right? Or something. Before that, the government was not responsible for healthcare. There was no healthcare in the scope of the federal government.
Right.
Now there is. If they did housing, if they did job programs, welfare, like you could kind of go throughout history and see where the government literally took a role it did not have. And there's kind of this confusion that if they expand an existing role, that can be bad for its own reasons, right? But that isn't a lot of times what they mean by big government. Like if China invades us and then we spend $10 trillion on a war to beat China, that's not like in a lot of ways, that's not expanding federal government, because it's all done under the auspices of national defense, which has always been under the scope of the federal government. It's like the few things the right actually pretty wholesale gives to the federal government as a scope.
Right. Yeah, I like that metric. I do.
Okay, I think I figured out a way to conceptualize this in my brain. All right. Is that libertarians, even though there's like the weird thing, the Libertarian Party, which I'm not sure I understand, but it seems like generally libertarians in America are end up aligning more with the Republicans. And even though I think there's a big distinction between people with libertarian moral philosophies and moral intuitions and people with socially conservative or conservative moral intuitions and moral philosophies, just the fact alone that the libertarians, by happenstance, by tradition, by a million other reasons, end up aligning with the Republican Party, that just that fact that happens just necessitates on principle that the Republican Party is going to have to maintain some level of standing up for that sort of libertarian principle of limited federal government. So even if you have, which I still stand by, that people that are socially conservative don't really believe in those libertarian principles, they're still going to be chained to the libertarians in their party that do and restricted.
They're glazing part of their voter coalition.
Right. So, which the Democrats, I don't think, don't have that. So I do think it is a fair argument to say, based on that principle, to say, okay, well, the Republicans should be more likely on average to live up to the principle that they're stating of saying that they're going to like not have the federal overreach, power, because they do have to like acknowledge the libertarians in their party, where I don't think the Democrats have that.
Yeah, I'd say that's fair. I mean, I said I think I'm a little more libertarian minded than most conservatives for sure, and nothing freaking pisses me off more than when they start talking about banning porn and anime,
Sure.
All that kind of just like, God damn it, shut
Right.
up. Like, please stop. We're going to lose because of you again. And I think a lot of the right kind of picks up on that, and then they go, okay, well, we'll be more libertarian then.
Okay. Mitch for $5 thank you. Says Sitch, you need to watch the anime Mushal. It's like Mob Psycho meets Harry Potter. Also, what are your thoughts on Yu Yu Hakusho? Also favorite My Hero character. I've seen Mashal. I love Mashal. I haven't seen season 2. I've read and watched season 1. It's great. Mashal's an amazing anime. Everyone should watch it. I never could get into Yu Yu Hakusho. I tried watching as a kid. I don't know, just didn't connect with me. My favorite My Hero character is obviously All Might because he's the best. What do you mean? Come on. Base All Might. He's an American.
My Hero Academia. That's the show. Yeah.
Yes. He's a Japanese guy who loves America. What's not to like? Gay Ben for $10. Thank you so much. Says you don't critique, quote, the left. Your criticism is on CRT and queer theory. A lot of room to agree. Lord, you have called yourself on the left. You've recently stated property rights aren't left versus right. So I guess, and this, I want to bring this up, and then we got kind of sidetracked. I guess this is based on my view of how the politics breaks down right now, is that seems to me that the majority of Democrats that are, my age or older, people who are, I shouldn't even say my age, that are like the middle-aged boomer people, the Democrats that are like 40s and up, they don't agree with, most of them, I don't think, agree with wokeness on a principled position. They don't necessarily agree with it on a principled position. They either go along with it out of fear or because they essentially get tricked into supporting it. They don't really understand what's going on. And so I guess that's why I'm trying to make a difference between like the liberal notion and the leftist notion. And I guess part of the problem, I think, is that when we're talking about the right, when I'm talking about like Republicans are liberals in that conversation. Both Democrats, classical Democrats and classical Republicans, are both liberals. They both exist under the liberal philosophy. And just the terminology gets confused. And when I talk about like the conservatives, I should really be saying like the far right conservatives who are not liberal, the anti-liberal conservatives. And so I should be a little bit more careful with the language that I'm using to have that conversation. Number one. And then number two, I do think the Republican Party is kind of is more in the realm of like ideological capture, because I feel like the Democrats are like being tricked to do this stuff, or they don't necessarily believe it. They don't understand it. Where with the Republicans, as we were talking about, I think there seems to be broad Republican support for Donald Trump, even though I don't think Donald Trump necessarily like is an ideological, like, I don't think he necessarily like has an ideological position, or people like him for an ideological reason other than just not liking the way the government is at the moment.
I don't know
I
what
don't know. I have
like
to
a
clean up my
fair.
thoughts on that because it's all kind of complicated. But
I don't
I'll
know
try to
what
be
a
more careful
fair.
when using these labels in the future. But
What is like a fair criticism of the left? I mean, I don't understand. Like CRT, queer theory, like CRT specifically was being promoted on MSNBC. Like, how is that not like a mainstream left position?
because what I'm saying, my thought process is that the mainstream, like when you talk to a normie who identifies as a Democrat, and you ask them like the positions of CRT, like, and you don't say it's CRT, you say, do you believe that, are you in favor of black nationalism? Do you believe that we need communism? They're going to say, no, I don't believe in black nationalism. No, I don't believe in communism. But then you say, oh, are you in favor of CRT? They'll say, yeah, of course I'm in favor of CRT. I read an article that said it's just about teaching history, right? Like they don't
Yeah.
understand what the fuck the leftists are talking about. They're being tricked into supporting this bullshit.
Yeah,
This is a
but
conversation I'm sure we've all had like a million times with boomers.
criticizing that entire situation, that confusion, that misrepresentation, how is that not criticizing the left? We're definitely not
No,
criticizing the right. Like that's all taking place on the left.
right, but I
I
think
don't understand how he's saying we don't critique the left.
what he's saying, I I think what he's saying is that we make too clear distinction between like the leftists versus the liberals on the left,
Right.
and we are too quick to throw in the right as like like in a broad category.
No, we distinguish people on the right from racists on the right. Like we constantly do that.
That's true. That's true.
Like what? I mean, what the
If
fuck?
I've actually thought about this a lot.
I'm
The
the one
reason
that came
is
up with the stereotype, the greedy racist. Remember for people on the right, how I think that's unfair. Remember that?
that yes, I do remember.
We had a live stream with Destiny. Destiny completely misrepresented us. They're still misrepresenting us to this day. Remember, I came up with that.
what
Like,
what I
where
would
am I
say
throwing the right under the bus? This is like infuriating.
what
Go
I would
ahead,
say you
Oster
need
C.
to think about is when I see you guys critique the right, you differentiate, but it's all under kind of the pyramid of the right. And I don't even disagree with that statement, right? That it's all part of kind of the right wing. So you have like, the right wing is, has these intuitions of like, I don't know, patriotism or something, or nationalism. And that can be, patriotism, it can be ethno-nationalism, right? All the way, but it's all right wing. But when
No,
it
I
comes to kind
separate
of
the authoritarian right from the
they're still
philosophical right.
they're still
Like
separated.
you can have a belief in tradition and that, searching for the past for answers to society's ails. You can have a belief in that without being authoritarian about it. And I
Right.
respect that.
But no, I mean, what I would say is if you want to say the Nazis are right wing,
Yes.
is that true? Okay. Yeah. So that's when I see the left, when you guys critique the left or a lot of the moderate left, it's kind of like you're building two pyramids a lot of the time. You're building the moderate left pyramid that's like liberal and normal. And then like, I don't know, somewhere really far away are like the crazy leftists that are just like doing insane crap. And it doesn't boil up to the same place. Right? Everything on the
No,
right
yeah,
kind of
I
boils
understand. I
up.
understand exactly what you're saying. First of all, I agree everything you said, Adam, 100%. And that's part of
Okay,
why, like
thanks.
when we just did the video on Sunday, where it's like he keeps calling Critical Drinker conservative.
Yeah, holy shit! All Sunday.
Right. The subtext of what he means is he's saying Critical Drinker is a bad person. He is a greedy racist. Right. That is the
That's
subtext
exactly
of everything
right.
he's saying.
Yes.
Right. And we're identifying that. But I also understand what you're saying, actually, which is that we are sort of conceptualizing like the three pyramids, or like really four pyramids, which is that there's like the far leftists, there's the liberals, there's the right, and then sometimes we talk about like the far right, which is the monarchs and the white nationalists and shit like that. And there really needs to be another pyramid, I guess, which is like we need the equivalent. Like when we say like the liberal, we need like the right wing equivalent of that. Like who in the right exists as like the equivalent of that period. And I think the only reason that we don't haven't really framed that is because I don't really know what the word for that would be at all to like make that distinction.
Liberal Republicans.
We could say that. It's going to trigger the fuck out of
it's not going to
work. We could say that, like the liberal Republicans. So.
I mean, they are. Look, if you look at the political spectrum, you're talking about the difference between the libertarian and the and the
We should just say like we should just start saying like the moderate right. That'd probably be
Yeah.
better.
Yeah. But I think it's just important. Like, what really, like, really triggered the shit out of me was when you had IRI on, I think Peace go on right after, I think it was October 7th.
Mm-hmm.
And they were both like, well, really IRI was like, are these people, are the Democratic Socialists even on the left? And he continuously said that. And Adam thankfully said, like, what the hell are we supposed to call them? But that's the attitude that I'm kind of talking about. Like, it's like there's this kind of, once you go to like socialists, you're not on the left. You're on the left, but you're not. You're leftist now.
Well, the right is doing the same exact thing with the Nazi argument that IRI was doing with the fucking socialists.
There's a lot more nuance into that one, though, because they're not
it's
saying
just,
that
no, there's not.
I don't think there is,
they're not saying that the culture of Nazis was not right wing. They're saying that they had left wing economic policies.
Mm-hmm.
Right, like, which is like, okay, fine.
That's a very, I think that's a very kind way of. So I don't think that's the argument you're making, but
well, but the point is, IRI is saying that Democratic Socialists of America are not on the left.
Right,
like,
but right.
Literally
so,
campaign with the Democrats. They're on the left. They call themselves on. Like, there is no distinction here. Like, I don't even know how you could draw that line.
No, and
I find a line with the Nazis, even if it's kind of weird.
Sure. And I mean, I'll be honest, I don't remember that exact conversation, but I'm assuming that we both said
I do.
on the left.
I
acknowledge that like the mainstream Democrat is not a socialist, but they're still on the left side of the spectrum. You can't say that they're not on the left side of the spectrum.
IRI tried to. I remember.
Okay, well, obviously it's fucking retarded because they are. Socialism is firmly on the left. It's ridiculous to say it's not, but.
Yeah.
I'm glad Adam remembers. Because, I was like, God damn it.
He tried to get away with a fast one there. He definitely did. What? They're not on the left. Are you kidding me?
Right. Well, IRI is very concerned
about the left's image. Yes.
Yeah, they're very concerned about like protecting like the left as an institution and the Democrats as an institution, which I don't think I really give a shit that much about.
Of course.
Nowhere near the capacity. I'm more just like trying to keep people in like the center because I think that's where the goodness is. So
the gooey
we
middle.
don't care about their brands.
The gooey middle. B mirrors for $4 or for $5 says don't let them force you to agree with something you don't. There you go. Don't let us force you.
Who's the you in that?
Me.
Is that
I guess
you?
Ocracy, but
okay.
Yeah, you guys bullied me into agreeing.
No, this has been great. Look, you've been a member of the Sitch and Adam community for a long time. Like you constantly super chat, and it's good to have you on and talk to you for once.
Yeah, it was very fun. Thank you.
Yeah, no, this is a good conversation. It's always easier. So much gets lost in text. That's like hard to interpret and explain. So
especially super chats, because you got to be real. I find myself editing. I edit my super chats like all hell.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really not a great system, but Brian for $50. Thank you so much for the $50, Brian. Says, I disagree, Sitch. While libertarians are a moderating presence, they do not agree with the right solely based on tradition, but because there's an overlap on stated principles, and Osh just laid out my argument on limited government perfectly. I know, I understand that argument. I'm saying I don't believe that argument. Okay.
Right. Maybe
that's the difference. I'm saying that I think that there are people who are conservative that are not libertarian who only make that argument because it's within their benefit to make the argument at this time. I'm skeptical that they actually believe that argument. Now you could say you disagree with me. That's fine, but that's just where I'm at.
We should have Brian on maybe next week or later this week. Yeah,
that'd be interesting too.
So. He super chats a lot too, and obviously
I like talking to you guys.
Yeah.
You gotta go though,
like we're way over. So
yeah, I know. Dialogue always for $5 says you're just as bad as people you criticize about CRT. You both pick and choose whatever part you want CRT to be and apply it to the whole. Well, this is my problem with that dialogue always is that, when I read CRT information and I'm talking about like the core principles of CRT, unless the person says I'm in favor of CRT, these principles specifically, but I disagree with these principles out of the core elements, I'm going to assume they agree with the core elements and that everything they're saying comes from the core elements. I don't know why you're so attached to CRT. Like, I literally don't know why you're so attached to CRT in defending it, as opposed to just saying CRT sucks. It's dog shit because it has like all this like dead weight to it that I don't agree with. Let me find something else that I can kind of push for or advocate for.
And Dialogue Always is always invited on anytime. Every time he comes on, he drives you guys crazy. We make $1,000 in super chats. It's great. So Dialogue Always, anytime.
Yes. The Butter Handle for $5 says, I want to call into the show, but you guys never talk about the politics of Assassin's Creed, so I don't have the opportunity. There you go.
Well, someday.
Arithmus for $2 says, do you guys accept that the quote, we are a democracy argument is also just a word argument because it's used to hand wave away the other mechanisms in our government outside of democracy? 100,000% I agree with that. Yes.
And disagree with both of them, obviously.
Yeah. Yes. Sala for $2 says, many of the founding fathers believe that virtue is necessary for liberty. Are you saying that's not true on at least some level? Sean said in the Sam Cedar debate that a person's morals are the number one deterrent from crime. So I agree with Sean, obviously, in that sense. I don't think anyone disagree with that. But no, I do. Well, I don't know if I'd say virtue is necessary for liberty. I'd say virtue is necessary for liberty to function properly, right? To have a society that can't even function and have those values. Sure, I do agree with that. I don't disagree with that.
High trust societies have lower security costs that are going to need to be borne by the government. So I don't know if we can cover the security costs. I don't know what level of that sort of good population is necessary to make the security costs affordable. Do you understand what I'm saying, Sitch? I don't know what the tipping point is where the security costs become unaffordable because people are just too big pieces of shit.
No, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. But I get my hackles up because, and I don't know if Ben Shapiro means in this way, and I said that, but we have definitely talked to a lot of people on the dissident right who are saying we can't have liberty in our country because we've lost virtue. Or saying that's why liberalism doesn't work is because you necessarily have to have an anti-liberal, right-wing conceptualization of value that supersedes or exists before liberalism can function. And if you lose it, and that liberalism will necessarily make that go away. So that's just what I'm like, gets my hackles up is those arguments. Because essentially someone's saying, because I don't agree with the moral positions that society's in right now, we can't have freedom or liberty anymore.
You got to talk about the tangible effects, though, in my book. Like, if you want to make a logical argument that, watching porn leads to some heightened level of crime, and that level of crime requires more law enforcement, and that law enforcement costs a certain amount of money, and a certain tipping point, taxes become too onerous that we can't afford that level.
Hold on, I gotta go. Sorry. Hold on, I gotta be.
So, okay. Well, anyway, maybe we should just call it a day then. Did we get to all the super chats? I don't know if he got to all the things. Did he say he was going to come back?
I don't know. He did read one of the more recent ones, but.
Well, look, if we missed any of the other super chats, we'll get them tomorrow, and we'll just call it.
Okay, so I'm sorry about that. There is a my back. Okay, Saul for $2 says, on the Acolyte, there's an argument that it's hypocritical for prequel haters to complain about the lore changes involving Force births because many prequel haters hated Anakin being a virgin birth Messiah. I didn't hate that. I just thought it was like dumb. But once it's established lore, I mean, you just kind of have to accept it, I guess. So I don't know if that make you hypocritical. You can still say, I mean, the prequels sucked not because really that. The prequels sucked for very intensive reasons. I think the fact that Anakin was a virgin birth was like very, very low at the bottom of reasons why the prequels sucked. So, but anyway, thanks for coming on, Ostracy. Thanks for all the super chats, guys. It was a great conversation. And I guess we'll see y'all tomorrow.
Yeah. Take care, everyone. Hey, watch House of the Dragon. I think we'll talk about it tomorrow. Bye-bye.
All right, cool. Nice. Well, thanks for coming on, Ostracy. It was great talking to you.